Good evening. I'd like to call this special board meeting to order today and welcome everybody here and those in attendance. Thank you for your attendance. And now I ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Harold Brown.
Present.
Maxine Drew.
Here.
James Humphries. Brittany Jones.
Present.
Wanda Brownlee Page.
Present.
Galvini Wynn.
Here.
Stacy Aker.
Present.
Thank you. And now I ask for the approval of the special agenda.
So moved. Second.
Motion's been made and second. Are any questions? Hearing none, I call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Those disapproving? Hearing none, so ordered. It passed. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Let's see now. Dr. Lang.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Good afternoon, Board.
Good afternoon.
Nice to see you all. Has it warmed up?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, I want to start by letting you know that Dr. Wynn is going to try out for the Royals.
Yes, I am.
She did an excellent job throwing out the first pitch on
I did.
Saturday's event. She did. She did.
Threw my arm out, so I'll have to retire tomorrow.
It was a wonderful day. It was cold, but we saw some terrific baseball.
I said you're already on the DL.
She's on the DL. Mr. Thompson, thank you for your work to make that happen. It was great to see our young men playing down at that beautiful stadium. So it was good to be there. A little chilly, but it was good. And also on Saturday was the Saturday Math and Science Academy celebration year-end. They had about 600 people in the Jewel Hall. It was quite crowded and very exciting. They did an outstanding job celebrating the end of their program for this year. So if you weren't there, I'm sure we'll be able to get some pictures. We have a lot planned for you today, but I just wanted to quickly tell you that we had a very good visit with our outside visiting team for the Kansas Education Systems of Accreditation on Thursday. We'll give you more of a report at your regular meeting next week, but it was a day of a lot of conversation, a lot of questions, and they left with some positive comments, so very productive. I also had the chance this afternoon to meet with Pastor Terry Bradshaw. You might recall he came to a listening session. We had a very good conversation. He wants to get his church more engaged with us, and he also wants to work with us on some of the challenging issues that we are facing with some of our youth. So we'll be meeting with him again in a couple of weeks to develop some plans. There is a lot going on your calendar, but I wanted to mention at this point the luncheon at J.E. Dunn headquarters on May the 10th. This is set up for the board to come and have an in-depth opportunity to hear more about Dunn's diversity and inclusion program and be right there with all of the Dunn personnel to ask lots of questions. So please mark your calendar. We thought it would be more productive to have that conversation there at the Dunn facility than trying to recreate it here for you. So it's May the 10th. I believe it's at 11:30. Is that right, Dr. Manner? 11:30.
What's their address, please?
Well, yeah, they're downtown KC Mo.
No, they're doing the KCK site, the logistics.
Oh, you are?
center.
Okay, we'll get you that address. So,
What? The what?
It's called the Logistics Training Center, I believe, KCK site.
all right, we'll get you that address so you can get that on your calendars. But lots going on, but those are a few highlights for this evening. I just want to thank you because you have two very robust topics on your agenda tonight, the Code of Conduct discussion and budget planning. So we have tried to craft the work, so we have about an hour on the Code of Conduct. If you need more, we'll take more, and then we'll move into the budget work. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Lane. Next, I'd like to give my, just an update. I attended the Taste of 500 at Wyandotte High School. The students at Wyandotte Academy put it together. This year was it was excellent because instead of them writing out comments, they gave them tickets and had boxes where they dropped in whether yes or no they liked it or not. So, and it went much faster to see. The elementary students came through, lots of them, and the middle schools. Unfortunately, they didn't have any of the high schools that took advantage of it, but it was quite well received, and it was really nice this year. I also attended Bridge to Argentine, and that's where they had the students that will be coming to Argentine next year. It was like a orientation and stuff. That was really nice. The parents, lots of parents came with their students, and it was really interesting to see. They were excited about that. And then later on that afternoon, I also went to the harp concert. It was excellent, excellent. Well worth the time to see our students. And the students that were in that harp concert, most of them played other instruments as well, but it was just amazing to see the work and listen to the music. It was lovely. And Saturday, I went also to see the start of the softball, played at the George and Doris Haley Field. And then after that, I left to go to the Saturday Academy, their closing program. That was really nice. They had, as Dr. Lane's already said, over 600 people there. And they said when they first started it, they had, 20 years ago, they only had like 8 or 9 seniors. This year they had over 60, and it was just phenomenal. The middle schools were there, and it was just, to see their projects and what they had done was just awesome, just really awesome. And then this morning, I went to the ribbon cutting in West Branch Library to see the opening of the first phase that they've done at the library. You need to go see the West Branch, the changes that has happened so far. It's wonderful. Any other board members have any reports?
I attended the Bridge program at Argentine as well. It was really nice. My kids enjoyed it as well. I think that's a great model for us to think about implementing in other schools. What was awesome is they had many STEM programs that they involved their students in that I hadn't heard about before. And they really try to engage the students with the community. So they have about 10 companies that they work with to have students go to actual companies, and they come to the school and mentor them. For example, Walmart's leadership come to Argentine to actually talk to them and mentor them to a certain level, and I hadn't seen that before. So it's a lot of things that Argentine has in place. One unique thing about their Bridge program, because I've seen it at some other schools where it's a parent introduction, the great thing was the parents led a lot of the tours. And the parents are the ones who did a lot of the talking and engaging with the other parents to really get them engaged early on to what their students will be doing. Another thing, they have a web program for students who are in 8th grade that can mentor the 7th and 6th graders. So they led the incoming 6th graders in activities such as, let's see how fast we can calculate these math problems. Let's do some science, and what do these things add? And that was so great to see the teachers taking a step back and allowing those 8th grade students to be in front and to answer questions. And it was just like, oh my goodness, this is a program that needs to be implemented around all schools. So I really enjoyed that experience, and I'm glad they took time to invite us.
So let me ask you, is that a peer mentoring program?
Yes, and actually they have to sign up and volunteer. It's a volunteer, so it's not like favorite students or whatever, because I got to talk to about 5 of them. They volunteered and wanted to help mentor the new students coming in. And so when one of the 5th graders asked, hey, what exactly do you guys do all year? Do you guys just like have fun? Because they were really having fun and loud and throwing something back and forth to make some experiment. They said, we do this because we want to keep the reputation of the school high. And we know that if we set the example, then we can go to high school and know that we have pride. I mean, it was just like, oh my goodness, this is us. This is our district. This is what many schools need to emulate. So it was just a great experience.
I had the opportunity to help plan a career day at Bertram Carruthers, And I want to thank Dr. Lang for giving me some names, the attorney Goheen for helping me in coming out. I thought he was going to send somebody, but we had the great privilege of having his presence, and he did an excellent job. Dr. Nguyen, thank you also for coming.
When was it?
Friday. And the kids were beautiful. They were awesome. And it's nice when you have smaller classes and the things that you can do with the kids. And we're hoping next year we can make it bigger and better. We were honored to have Mr. Carruthers' son, Dr. Bertram Carruthers Jr., there as well, and he also presented. So we had a good time, and it was just fun. It's something about the little bitty ones that tug at your heart. And they're so young, they're so energetic, and somehow we got to keep that going so that they won't lose it once they get to middle school and high school, because the energy is there, and they're creative and just awesome.
Well, thank you. At this time, we'll have the reports of the superintendent.
Thank you very much. Board, we're going to begin with a conversation, a deep dive into the Student Code of Conduct and Parent Handbook. As we've been sharing with you, that these are your policies, and so the team has worked really hard to kind of create a process for us to go through this afternoon so we can hear your voices, make some meaningful changes in those documents. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Clay and Mr. Stewart.
Board, Madam President, Dr. Lang, thank you for the opportunity to return this evening to take a deep dive, but also to receive some of the feedback just based on our meeting last week. And I know part of the follow-up, which I'd like to start with, is that you requested some of the data, the board-related data, and so David Rand will be presenting that to you before we begin to look into the code.
Thank you very much. Here are short copies.
Yeah, I have an electronic copy, David, so I'm good.
Fine. Okay.
Need to have one for Jamie.
Thank you.
And get it made.
Susan will get it.
Yeah.
So now get that. Hello, my name is David Rand. I'm the Director of Research and Assessment. I work closely with Lisa and her team to put together discipline data for a variety of reasons. I know that she has been bringing you guys some various pieces of data. We've been listening to the board, and some of the things that we heard were, one, that there's a real concern around the extreme behavior that's occurring at the building, as well as a desire to see multiple years of data. And so what we've tried to put together here is something that's pretty straightforward, that kind of captures both of those ideas or concerns, but that are some pretty straightforward numbers in general to kind of understand, as opposed to giving you pages and pages of grids of data to pour through. And obviously, if you guys want to see additional detail, we can always provide that, but this is kind of a general jumping off point. So if we look at the first piece, or the first page, just kind of a reminder of what we talked about, or what Lisa had spoke to around our first semester data, that 86% of our kids as of first semester had not received a discipline referral, and 92% did not receive a suspension. So that was just through first semester. So thinking historically, we also wanted to provide you what that information kind of looked like over the previous 5 years, specifically related to the targets that we have in our DCIP. That is, we're looking at the students that have just one referral, and we're also looking at the students that have 2 or more referrals. In the same way, we're looking at the number of students that have just one suspension, as well as the number of kids that had 2 or more suspensions. And so this first page just basically gives you 5 years of historical data specifically related to our DCIP targets. In general, over the last 5 years, we see that between 76 and 79% of students do not receive discipline referral, and between 85 and 86% of students did not receive suspension. And so what that means is over the past 5 years, it's varied somewhere between 76 and 79% as far as the total percentage of kids that do not receive a discipline referral. And then the data's been extremely consistent between 85 and 86% of students that do not receive a suspension. And so I know we have presented you what it looked like through first semester of this year. We also thought providing you 5 years of detail, kind of in historical context, would give you guys some better and more information to inform your decision making. So that is the first page. If you flip to the next page, this is where we're going to dig a little deeper into those numbers. So if you look at overall, if you average our past 5 years together, we can say that about 77.5% of our kids do not get a discipline referral. That means that approximately 22.5%, or a little less than a quarter of students, did have at least one discipline infraction. And this is kind of on average over the last 5 years. Now, when we look at that smaller group of students that had one or more infractions, we found that there's a chunk of students that have quite a few of the overall total infractions. And so what we wanted to do was kind of set some parameters over identifying kind of some cut points where we start to see some of the more extreme behaviors that we're seeing among our students. And so as we were looking at referrals, we set that at basically, if you have 8 over the course of a year, that means that you're receiving at least 2 each quarter, which also aligns to kind of what we're looking at as our DCIP priorities. And so that's how we kind of set the threshold at looking at students that had 8 or more referrals. We could have set this number a few different places if we had some more time, but it's just a pretty good cut point of which we were looking. And so, again, if you think about, we start with our population as a whole, only about 22% of those students are actually getting referrals. Of that 22%, 13% of those students are receiving 8 referrals or more over the course of the school year. And now when we look at that subset of kids, so we're looking at 13% of the 22% that have an infraction, that is 3% of our total population if you look at all of our K-12 students. So we took all of our kids as a whole, we took out the chunk that had discipline referrals, and out of that chunk, we looked at the ones that had 8 or more. And that was slightly under 3%, 2.9% of all our students. Now that 2.9% of students are responsible for almost half of all discipline referrals across the last 5 years, 44%. And so 44% of our discipline referrals are coming from 3% of our students. And furthermore, when you look across the last 5 years, there's actually 62 of those kids that show up every single year. That's 5 years in a row that they have shown 8 or more infractions. And so what that's really revealing to us is that we have some students across the district, and it obviously will vary by building, but that's a relatively small percentage of our kids that are responsible for a large chunk of the behavior. I hope that makes sense. Let me stop and ask if there are any questions at this point, just as I don't always do the best job of explaining.
So knowing that there's a majority of the same students who are repeatedly going to have behavior issues, what is the goal for handling that?
If I could insert there, I think that's where some of your work with the Code of Conduct is going to provide some guidance. I've had the opportunity to talk to some of you individually and listening at some of the listening tours. Something that surfaced more than once was this notion of some alternative services for students. I think what might be being revealed in this data is that our current system, I'm just going to use the last number, 62 students, does not work for them. If they're getting repeatedly sent, if I'm understanding year after year after year, well, it seems like we have an obligation to do exactly what I think you're asking. What's something different we can put in place for this group of students? Ms. Brown-Page, I think you've asked this question, what's something different we can put in place for this? And I know that you all, at least on other occasions, have mentioned this notion of some kind of alternative program. So I think in your work, when you get to the code of conduct piece, as we start thinking about mechanisms in place, example only, I want to emphasize that this is just an example, you all have to make this decision, but if you decide that there's a threshold, that if a student meets a certain threshold, that our policy that you all will be, that they have to be connected to some other support services. So that, I think that's an example of how it will bleed into your future conversation about code of conduct policy.
So Dr. Strickland, when you say threshold, then that connects to the threshold that Mr. Rand set in running this data, 8 or more referrals as an example.
I think he meant that as an example.
Right. But it could be higher, could be lower.
Could be higher, could be lower. What makes the most sense? So that we have environments that aren't disrupted for, if I'm understanding, for 97% of our students that aren't disrupted by this 3% of our students. But at the same time, giving them a fair chance to have their needs better met. I don't think anyone would advocate for just putting them out. Let's get them connected to some resources that can be supportive to their particular learning style and what they need. Now, I think that might be where you were going, Dr. Yeager.
Right. And then also, how did you determine that 8 was what you would base the numbers?
8, I'll be honest, the 8 number was pretty arbitrary. I just went off of kind of connecting it back to our DCIP, that we are looking at our repeat offenders. And so if I didn't have time to, like I would have ran it at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. But kind of arbitrarily, I picked 2 a quarter, which added up to 8. But there might be a better number for that threshold that you said. I think it's quite possible. Now, the threshold for the suspensions, moving to the last page, that was reset at 3, kind of based on what Octavio has noticed from the research and talking about at what threshold the number of suspensions really starts to impact stuff, kind of from a research standpoint. Went with 3 suspensions. And if we look at that last page, if we look at the last 5 years on average, a little over 85% of our kids did not have any sort of in-school or out-of-school suspension. The suspension data that we present, I think it's important to emphasize, we include in-school as well as short-term out-of-school, long-term out-of-school, as well as expulsions. And so those are the 4 types of suspensions that we look at. So if we're looking at about 15% of our kids that were suspended at least once, about 18% of those had 3 or more. So similar with what we did with infractions, we take all of our kids as a whole. About 15% of those are getting suspended at least once during the school year. Of that 15%, about 18% of those are getting suspended 3 or more times. And so when you take 18% of the 15%, that translates to a little under 3% of our total population, actually 2.7% of our total population. And when you look at the suspensions, that slightly under 3% are responsible for almost 60% of all suspensions over the last 5 years. 59.3% exactly. And so, again, we're seeing that, and again, as you look through the data year after year, there's frequent flyers. Every single year for the past 5 years have been suspended at least 3 times. And so hopefully this data kind of matches up with some of the concerns the board had been bringing forth around extreme behaviors that we're seeing in classrooms, as well as a desire to see some more historical information, while trying to keep it so that I can not mess up the explanation of this. Yes.
Something, I guess in my mind, I'm wondering, is this skewed a little bit? Because when you have class 1 offenses, and I'm not saying throw people away, you can't write up anybody. You're encouraged not to, so does that skew it just a bit?
So I think in hearing the board express concern about consistency across buildings and across classrooms, I think you're 100% correct. Yes, the data will be influenced by the fact that a teacher at building A may take care of something in the classroom, may or may not be under pressure from the principal not to make the referral to the office, may or may not be. But that teacher may have a different response for that same behavior as perhaps another teacher in another building because of building-wide expectations, building-wide culture, the expectation that you enter the stuff into the system. And so I appreciate that point because I think it really helps us target a challenge area where we as a district can start looking systemically and how do we make sure that there aren't differences and how do we ensure that when we look at this data, it means the exact same thing across every single school. Because right now, not just here, but across the nation, that's a challenge for folks, depending on what the expectation at each individual building is. So I greatly appreciate that you have brought that point up because it's absolutely something that we need to be looking at and addressing.
First of all, I want to thank you for putting this together because I'm sure it was quite a bit for you to be able to do. But one of my concerns is I like the fact that you gave us the information from K through 12. But my question is, at what level is the highest, whether it's elementary, middle, or high school? Those numbers, where are they?
So it's pretty clear it's at middle school. Okay. Middle school is the biggest area. There's a little bit of a drop-off between middle and high school, and then a much bigger drop-off until you get to elementary. And so, in general, with the discipline data, as well as this particular data, because I was looking at doing it elementary, middle, high, but that would have ended up adding like 6 more slides, and I'm not sure if I'm allowed that much time. So,
But we can bring slides on our own.
Yeah.
To have more clarity.
I have a question for Dr. Strickland. How do we handle, just as a matter of information, how do we handle repeat offenders presently?
I think schools try to customize some support, so I think that can vary across the board right now, but I do think that's a part of what our discussion has to be about.
Okay.
I know that there are some plans right now around how do we implement some social emotional supports for students like that. But depending on the severity of some of those repeat offenders, we try to connect them with types of all kinds of resources. Our counselors get involved. I know they get connected to PACES at times. It can be a menu of items that we get connected to. I think what we as a system want to do is become more systematic about what that looks like. This will equal this.
Right,
this
exactly.
will equal this.
That makes sense.
And so if I can just insert, as the board gets ready to do some of their work around the code of conduct, I'll try to draw some potential connections for you all to think about. When you look at some of the revisions that you want to make in that code of conduct, you all have said that something needs to be different. Well, something that could be specifically different is you could require some kind of alternative support within that context. And then to translate that into what you're going to do after the code of conduct conversation is you as the stewards of the budget will have to allocate the necessary resources in order to have those kind of alternative supports in place. I know that there's some generic thinking about what that may cost, but as you prioritize the things that you deem most important for the system to focus on, that's a little bit of an example of how that could align with your change in code of conduct to the allocation of the resources necessary to support that expectation of that change in code of conduct.
I had another, I know you did it for K to 12, but I received some letters from some people who work in the early childhood program who have some young people who have some serious problems, and their concern is, we need more help. What we have is just not doing it. And to a point that some are disrupting the class so bad that the other kids are emulating what they're seeing. And I think we need to help them too, in order for these babies to be successful as they transition from early childhood to K to 5, and to make sure that they're okay, because they're saying there's some young people that are out of control, and not much is being done to help them. So we don't want to leave them out of the conversation. We want to make sure we help them as well, because we want all the kids to be successful. And if they're not doing as well in early childhood, then we just got a problem that's just feeding and growing and growing and growing.
If you've ever tried to reason with a 3-year-old, I think you can appreciate that notion there, that there's some support that you need there. So I think that as we look at how do we wrap and insert supports, that definitely needs to be on agenda too, that we don't leave out a level that can reach out.
But let me add, with the Head Start grant, there are resources that we put in the grant, such as family service workers that work closely with the parents, with the families, and also behavior interventionists that also work closely with teachers, families, and go into the classroom to do observations, and then conference with the teacher on some possible strategies. So in our planning for next year, Dr. Cook and the executive directors are looking at what additional resources are needed. Do we need more behavior interventions? Do we need more family service workers to help those young people that you're talking about and their families as well?
I have a question. Dr. Lang, with the Greenbush contract, they currently said that they are able to take 75 students. So currently, is there anything in place to where we have presidents of the students they take, or could you explain that a little more? Like since we saw 68 or current or repeat offenders, if there's an instance where we want to refer a number of them, how would that work? Or
Yes, we do control, and that's part of Mr. Australia's role, is that he and Donna Devine's work is to decide who goes to Fairfax Learning Center, and the contract does have slots of full-time equivalency. So when you get to the budget part of today, we can talk about how much money you want to allocate to increase that resource. So hold on to that thought. But yes, that's a negotiations process with the folks who run our Fairfax Learning Center.
okay, thank you.
It's good.
What I'd like to ask you, Mr. Rand, and for me, and I think you're hearing the response, and this is with respect, we can handle data, okay? So don't, if you come in low, we'll ask you to go back and come in high. So in my opinion, I'd come in high, which means divide preschool, K-12, blah, blah, blah. Now here's my real question, my real concern. So you have 5 years of data, correct? Okay, now are all of these infractions defined the same? You say you have 5 years of infractions, didn't receive a disciplinary referral. Okay, so are the repeat offenders doing the same? Are they, does anybody ever graduate out? So you got a new one at the other front end, and are these the same people? And what have you done for 5 years so that I can do this year 1 and I can do this year 2? You know, there's no correcting of the behavior if you know they're the same people. So you got 15 questions there in one.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Well, at first, I wasn't referencing the board's ability to process data. I was referencing my ability to clearly explain it. And sometimes I get a little nervous. So that was more, I guess, on my end than yours. I should have clarified. But I would definitely keep that in mind. It comes with some more detailed information in the future. And looking at the types of infractions, they honestly vary because these students are getting so many infractions that they actually have the ability to hit a bunch of different categories. across the spectrum. To speak to that, what would be interesting is to dig into this deeper and then to layer on top of this, okay, of these, are these class 1, are these class 2, are these class 3, are these class 4? I think you make a wonderful point that we need to dig into this more to see what are these behaviors. I definitely appreciate the fact that, yes, we have 5 years of data that has been showing us, the same thing. I think that's, probably something some other folks can talk to. I think that's why, although we would prefer to do this sooner, we're really looking at a systemic social emotional initiative that can support, some of these behaviors. When talking about the occurrences and the numbers, kind of what we found is if you tell people we want the numbers to go down, the numbers will go down. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there are different behaviors taking place in the building. So to respond to that, I would say that you make a very good point, and that I feel we probably had some more opportunities to address, some of these behaviors. But I defer to others, but I think that's also why, we're pretty seriously looking at making social emotional health one of our district priorities. Because, doing a few tweaks here and there or telling people we want the numbers to go down, I don't think it's going to have the impact on actual behaviors that we want to see. So,
All right. And I would hope that we would have a district-wide consistent policy so that it wouldn't vary from building to building. And I'm not quite comfortable with if that is the reality, then I think we've opened ourselves up for a lawsuit that if Johnny at building A does something and receives X type of response, and Sally at building Z does similarly and receives a different response, I'll put it like this. I hope that hasn't occurred, but if there's any chance of that, then I think we must put as number one consistency and clarity, so that there is, and I think that's what we're doing this evening, that if you step on that yellow cord, I don't care what building you are, everybody knows and everybody has been told clearly that that is the response.
That's a great segue, I believe, into where Mrs. Stewart is going to take us now, looking at what are the responses this board wants to the certain behaviors. I didn't mean to interrupt, Mr. Brown.
But doesn't that come down with the consistency in implementing the code of conduct? Yeah, and so I can understand what you're saying. If it's not implemented consistently, if there's no standard, then what you end up doing is diluting it to a point where it's really not meaningful. If you don't find any consistency, what happens is if Joe Blow does something and he does not do it, and the next person doesn't do it the same way, then the whole disciplinary code is meaningless unless there is some consistency. So I hope that we're going to be looking at holding teachers or whoever accountable for standardizing their implementation of the code. Because if not, it doesn't mean anything. If he can get away with it, and this other person doesn't get away with it, then you really haven't accomplished anything by having that code of conduct in place.
Well, and I think too, we have to consider the culture of the school, the same standard of excellence and behavior for students in one building, the same excellence of behavior we should model in another building too. So,
I totally agree.
Yeah.
And lastly, are the suspensions the same? Did Johnny get suspended for one violation, and are they the same violation?
Not always. Again, it's a nice mix. These kids that are frequent flyers tend to hit a lot of different behaviors. I would need to dig back into the data to get a firm answer.
Mr. Rand, when you're looking at that, what are the most common for suspension?
For suspension, I don't have, I should have brought that, I should know it off the top of my head because I've been looking at this stuff for a while. But just not being confident, I don't want to say a number.
Okay, so you can get that for us.
I actually have first semesters, the top three, or at least I can go by class. So the top incident for class 1 was skipping class. That's what you're right?
Yeah, well, I think they were specifically asking which behaviors resulted in a
Oh, not
suspension,
the
not just what were the
Okay.
most prevalent behaviors,
Got it.
but when looking at suspensions.
That might be helpful to bring to a later
I mean, I
meeting.
can say that in general, looking at previous years, around 20% of class 2 end up in a suspension, but class 3 is a much higher rate
Right.
of suspensions. That doesn't answer your question, but.
Well, then one explanation could be the suspensions are class 3 and higher, because that's what warrants a suspension.
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
But we don't know what.
We can bring that to you.
Yeah,
Dr.
but there still must be, for the most part, class 3s are still consistent. They're the same.
But in our data, he said ISS was included in the suspension rate as well. So that's not just straight class 3, but it was in-school suspension as well.
Could be, yeah.
And short-term suspension and long-term.
Yeah, so the pie chart is, we don't know what's in that slice of pie.
There are many, many, many ingredients in that slice of pie that I think we could dissect and look at a lot of different ways. And I think it's up to us to figure out what's the most efficient way of looking at those, kind of with your guidance around the bigger picture of what you're wanting to see.
So what I'm hearing is I think we're all in agreement that we have a monumental task that we have to do, and we're all willing to come forth and do what we can, because we need to address it and find these alternatives to fix this, to make sure that the message is given across the board to all of our schools.
So thank you, board, for wanting to make sure and follow the data. And what I did was provide you a hard copy of the code. And when I was before you last week, we went through each class. And so just as a follow-up to the board's feedback, which I appreciate the wisdom and feedback helps to certainly shape your policy, is that Dr. Strickland, and I'll take us through that, where it might be appropriate to think about those alternative plans and our options, but also to speak to the responses so that we can continue to align our implementation, which is part of the Code of Conduct handout I provided. Again, that there has been work over the last several years to begin to address what I identify as Tier 3, the students that are finding the most frequent number of infractions or the most frequent number of suspensions. What do we do then to begin to look at that third tier student, that small percentage, although probably feeling most of the disruption in class, even though it's a small number of our students. So that brings me back to going through, if this is helpful to you, to go back to class 1. But I just wanted to, again, if we start with class 5, as we move to class 1, begin to speak to that consistency around the progressive approach to discipline, so that we know that every building, when we talk about implementation of your policy, is doing the same thing across the district. And even as those are defined, and we define those offenses by what's disruptive in the classroom, in class 2, if you're still with me on page 5, what seriously disrupts the classroom, and then we get into what seriously jeopardizes school order, and in class 4, criminal acts. So that begins to identify the level of behavior that's much more serious as we move along. Again, to speak to the feedback last week so that we can begin to identify perhaps some of those students that are the frequent flyers at Tier 3 as we move along in responses and for the continuity. So when I was before you last week, the recommendation for the board's consideration was to maintain that class 1 behaviors, that when we think about, again, our responses to behaviors that can be redirected or managed in the classroom, that the option is not short-term or long-term suspension. That's currently what we have in our Code of Conduct, and that we begin to work on those progressive approaches to the responses to the behaviors, to the offenses. modeling, redirecting, teaching, loss of each of those things. And the progressive discipline, again, is to also maintain that consistency. What's the response to class one? And there can be an office referral, but again, it's most of those behaviors that you can see when you think about what's happening in the classroom. Again, you can provide resources, but when you think about, for example, truancy on page 10, students that perhaps are out of school, well, we want to maintain that we're not providing short or long-term suspension. We want to work on identifying the root cause, and again, that gets into the implementation, but that's why we're supporting and making a board's recommendation for your consideration that we don't then suspend students who are out of school. Sorry, Mrs. Payne.
Well, I don't know if it's now the time. I've been going around talking to a lot of administrators and some teachers, and for the class 1 offenses, some of them felt that 5 and 8 should be combined, 2 and 7 should be combined, and on 8, that you add cell phones under possession of educational nuisance. And they also felt when it got to clarification of responses that we take out the word progressive and say something like, the following responses are listed as options, but we make sure that we add parental contact is mandatory. That they felt the administrators that I talked to felt that they needed more flexibility. They didn't want to do it as a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Give them some flexibility because every situation is different and some things may not require that going 1 and then you got to do 2 and then you got to do 3, 4, 5. And they felt if we said the following responses are listed as option and then options and make sure you add parental contact is mandatory. Because you would think it's common sense, but sometimes you do have to write it in, that you need to be contacting parents. If you can't reach them by phone, I know when I talked, we sent certified letters, we mailed postcards, we went to the house, because a lot of times there were problems with the phone numbers, the constant changing. So you want to make sure you cover yourself and you document. But a lot of the administrators felt if they had the flexibility and we could take out progressive order and put in the responses are listed as options, that they could cover it better.
Ms. Page, would you go through those combining numbers
Okay.
again?
When I talk to some people, I'm on page 6. They felt that we should combine 2 and 7. And that we should combine 5 and 8, and on number 8, add cell phones.
Okay, thank you.
And then I know you had said that the intent is not to, you don't want to suspend anybody. I get that on the class 1. But there may be a need to have, as an option, an office referral.
Which one is it?
To add it in that list of things that they could do in all the different categories.
And you were saying add cell phone to which one?
Number 8.
Okay.
So I want to make sure, Mrs. Stonebridge, thank you for that feedback.
Okay.
I want to make sure that I heard
Okay,
that 2 and 7,
right.
think about how those, I can work with committee around a define or collapse definition to bring back to the board. And that 5 and 8 also should be collapsed.
Yes,
And that 8 should also include the use
Cell
of
phone.
cell phone.
yes.
Okay. And then I also want to make sure I understand correctly in terms of the responses, because I want to make sure that I'm not hearing two different things, because I heard the consistency around the implementation of the responses, but also flexibility. So if the administrators have options while parent contact is mandatory, that I want to make sure that when we work on the implementation of the policy that I heard correctly, that they have some options which may look different in different buildings if they have some flexibility. So I just want to make sure that I understand them correctly.
Well, I think, yeah, because
Okay.
what I'm asking is, they told me, let me clarify that, because I wanted to hear from them and tried to give them an opportunity, because it seems like there's a fear of people speaking, and they didn't want to receive any sort of retaliation. So I said, no, I want to know from you, what do you think? You know, how do we make this work? How does it work better for you? And they felt, take out that word, those words, progressive order, and put in the following responses are listed as options. And make sure you include parental contact is mandatory.
And I would add, my clarification would be, as under early childhood, the person still would do 1, 2, 3, or 4. That there's not another one hanging out here. And that's what I don't think Mr. Rand, or I understood him saying that a teacher, principal, whatever, use different things. Well, the way I understand it, listed under options, it's still 1, 2, 3, 4 with parental contact mandatory. So you didn't go in and do something else. So I don't see the inconsistency there.
Okay, all right, perfect, I understand, yes.
Number 5, as I read it, it's relating to using the school's internet accessibility. So for instance, when they give out computers, I think that, is that relating to them using the computers in class is not there, right? On number 5? Oh, so I think that's the difference between number 8, which is number 8 appears to be similar, but I think something still needs to be there about when they're using the school computer in class, they still should be limited to not creating any of these things, because they go out there and create the Google account and they're on the school property creating whatever, and they can type whatever. So I still think there needs to be something designating that school usage computer and accessing the appropriate information. So I don't know if it needs to be clarified using, I don't know how that would be worded, but I think something additional does need to be there for when they're using those computers in class.
And thank you, Mary. This will allow us to go back and look at how we can bring back second or third read to wordsmith the language, provide some clarity, and then bring it back to you.
Okay, let me ask if, to understand, for clarity from you. Ms. Page said collapse 5 and 8. Are you
Right.
saying not to collapse, your opinion, not to collapse, or what?
Not to collapse, and if you don't, just clarify the wording. Because for instance, skateboarding, MP3, electronic devices, these are all things that I saw as being brought to the school per se.
Oh.
Number 5, I saw I'm participating in class in the computer lab. And in the computer lab, I'm accessing or creating an appropriate information or profane something in the classroom.
I think they can combine together, because usually the students are using the computers that will impede them from being able to do what they need to do. It's basically the same thing, whether they bring it of their own personal item, but they can be combined together.
But this one says participating in the, so you can add them together, but just to make sure that it's clear that they're participating in that classroom. So when they go to the computer lab and they're using our computers.
So are you in agreement that we can put them together?
Right, just as long as you, right. Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they can be combined, just clarify.
And I did, and so you just want to clarify that what the misuse interferes with teaching and learning. We can clarify that when we bring it back.
Yeah.
And then back to the responses, some had asked could they have an office referral listed under every category? Whether it's early childhood.
On page 6.
At the top.
Very top.
I just want to make sure it is there, so I think it's fine to move that.
It said, well, I just wanted to make sure it's in that list. I know it says it there. It said may warn an officer. However, the teacher will be primarily responsible. And again, in defense of teachers, this is their job. They're supposed to. But we keep adding more and more to the plate, and sometimes that creates a problem.
So you may not have to take it from the general explanation, but put it in the listing, so if
Yeah.
I have this on my refrigerator door, I know 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is there.
And then one of my concerns is in relation with parents, when they're looking at this, and how many times will they actually go to the very first paragraph and read that? But they'll look over at the administrative options, and if it's there, they will know that there has one that can be given.
So do not remove it from the definition
I would leave it in
explanations.
both places.
Exactly. So you get that. Okay.
And then under middle school, in terms of options, they suggested that you take out number 2, incentives for meeting behavior expectation.
1 and 2.
Yeah, 1 and 2.
Why not number 1? What, I don't understand the reteaching of classroom expectations?
That's done repetitively in the classroom at all times.
Okay.
So when a student is having a problem, why do you need to go back over it again with them when it has been done repetitively?
Okay. So at the elementary is okay, but not the middle school
Or high school?
or high school?
Was that 1 and 2
1 and 2,
at middle school and high school?
middle and high school.
And so what the incentives for meeting behavior expectations, what are currently the incentives? Or
Well, some of the teachers said, now, is the district going to provide some sort of incentives? Because a lot of teachers are spending a lot of their money already. It's not to say that they're not concerned, but what kind of incentives? Sometimes they involve some money, and if I'm already buying paper and pencils, and if I want to do hands-on, I'm buying stuff. And this says incentives, they're looking for something. And it was a time you could give a pencil, and everyone was excited about it. But I'm just throwing that out. This is what was told to me.
so what was the intent of what currently happens now?
So some of our schools take advantage of what they might call, for example, the Eagle Bucks. Some of the schools want some of the flexibility. They may be implementing, I've heard the board reference this, and so if they want to, they may use other incentives in the way of a uniform option, or some of them use it for different options for what I'm going to identify. I haven't, like maybe an assembly, they do different things to promote and catch students doing well. So if you walk into a building, you might see the character traits, and so they might hand out a citizen award, or they might hand out their Eagle Bucks. And so the incentives are still, speaking to what the board has said, still some of that autonomy about how they're acknowledging students that are doing well, because part of the code of conduct does, in the first part, identify how we're going to support the characteristics, traits, if you will, soft skills, about how we're going to provide those students the tools as we're providing the instruction in the classroom, the reteaching, which is why the committee has that in the current code of conduct, because it may provide more than one opportunity to demonstrate to a student what the expectation is. And we also wanted to provide parents, because this is the student and parent code. I know that at some point, if it's the board's consideration to return with the implementation piece for the staff, that this is what our parents see. And so we want them to know that we are doing the reteaching, that we are modeling the behaviors that we expect, that we're not moving just down part of what feels like for parents as punitive, that we're allowing the parents to know that we're doing all of these menu of options to make sure that your son or daughter is experiencing success, because they see the menu of options too, as Mrs. Drew indicated. And so that's why it's the consideration for the board that we are showing parents that even though we know what's happening, that they see that language. Part of what I shared in the first presentation of the code of conduct is that we were developing common language that feels welcoming to parents, because the feedback we also receive from parents is, well, how can you help us? What has worked, what hasn't worked? And so we thought it was important to show at every level that we're modeling and reteaching, because that's what's happening in the classroom. And so I just wanted to share that for the board's consideration. And if it's not that you don't want that in there, please don't remove it. I wanted to give some context around the committee's work that includes early childhood, middle school principals, high school principals, that we talk to students, that they have a voice in the feedback, so.
And also, Board, I would ask you to give some consideration to that one of reteaching classroom expectations, because I'm thinking, Ms. Drew, that at a certain point, we shouldn't have to. But in our model of instruction, there's a section called Conditions for Learning, and it talks about setting routines and procedures. So if Ms. Stewart and her team could figure out a way, how can you say that, but helping our teachers understand that under the model of instruction, that is our theory of action, and their evaluations and growth development is based on that conditions of learning, that we give a distinction between, yes, you provide conditions of learning, yes, you teach routines and procedures, but here in your consideration, Board, but then there's a time when we shouldn't have to do that with middle and high. So maybe some consideration for that, Ms. Drew, if Ms. Stewart and her team can come up with some wording that would honor that observation tool and model of instruction, and honor what you're bringing to the table.
Where I see it coming in place is in the SIT team plan. When the student comes with the teachers of that team, that reteaching can happen there. But from what I'm seeing here, that it's left totally up to one teacher. And usually when you do the SIT team plan with the student who is repetitively having these issues, then all of the teachers on the team will go over them with the student. That's where it should be, in my opinion.
Well, Ms. Stewart, you've got some feedback on that. Take a look at those options and bring some suggestions back. It could be, too, that you could add that in some preliminary language that talks about the expectation to teach and reteach.
So number 8, too.
Okay.
For middle school.
Board. As we move into page 9, this is now class 2, and so now you'll see that progression of behavior that seriously disrupts. And so the classifications begin again on page 9 and move through page 15. And for the board's consideration, now what's included in there, as the policy states, is that in-school suspension or even short-term suspension is an option of class 2. And short-term suspension is 1 to 10 days. What we are recommending for the board's consideration is that long-term suspension remains out of class 2. And just as a reminder, long-term is up to 186 days, and an expulsion is a calendar year. So yeah, so as it reads, short-term suspension is the option. And so as I am looking at this, I'll need to take the feedback as we think about reteaching and add it to class 2 and class 3. I didn't repeat that, but I'll let you know that's what I'll do, because I know I need to provide some time to rewrite that.
Let me ask to clarify what you just said. Expulsions is a calendar of full year. So if okay, the way it sounded, I could come back, I got kicked out in January, I can come back the next January.
So an expulsion is 365 days, a full year, and then as soon as long-term suspension, it's 186 days.
So Dr.
this
Wynn,
is
it can be.
academic year.
It can be January to January.
Yeah.
It depends on when that offense occurred. It's
That's what I
365
thought.
from that date of the offense
365 days.
So I can come back in February in the middle of the,
with the transition plan, I would hope.
okay,
Right.
You can't keep them out longer than that.
I got you.
Okay, again, in talking to principals, they wanted it worded just a little differently, where it says a class 2 offense may warrant an office referral. Short-term suspensions may be applied as an option. They took out as the last response, as an option.
Period?
On
And
page
stop
9.
there?
Yeah.
Okay.
The short term may be applied as an option.
And
Oh, yeah, as an option and not
As an
limited
option?
to, sorry.
See, has an option.
short, no, she's adding
Short-term
an option.
suspensions may be applied
And not
as an
limited.
option and not limited to. That's what they would like
Oh,
to say.
okay. I see it. I'm like, I don't see it as an option.
Or not limited
To
to.
what?
Can you read sentence
last
number 3
response.
again?
Okay. Okay, let me read it again. Okay, a class 2 offense may warrant an office referral. Short-term suspension may be applied as an option and not limited to, and I left off my last part.
This is a master, not limited to what?
I had it, and I lost it. Not limited to-
Ms. Page, I think I'm following you on page
Okay.
9 at the top where it says
Right.
applied as a last resort, take out last resort and may be applied. Maybe it's an option for them to apply. Is that where you are?
Well, yeah, I want to
Right.
say applied as an option.
Applied as an option, remove the words last response as an option, applied as an option.
Right.
Does that get it?
Yes, ma'am.
And the rest of the sentence, the entire rest of the sentence.
Yes, and the
Yes.
rest of the sentence. Uh-huh.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
And then again, the administrators asked that 3 and 5 be combined.
Any additional feedback from class 2?
So, clarification point. So, in an instance to where two students appear to be in a situation, one student is pushing the other student, and the other student is trying to walk away, when we look at those instances, only the student that's being aggressive is the one that gets disciplinary action? Or is there anything for that student who is involved? Or how, is that right? Or how does it work with interactions?
I think I understand correctly, if a student is being pushed by another student, are you asking if both students receive?
Right, is that considered a bullying situation, or is that a?
That will be determined by the administrator based upon the situation in itself, because each one varies according to the students who are involved.
Okay. Because I just think that something in class 2 needs to, because there's a lot of bullying type situations to where they're aggressive toward other students. Even, it was mentioned like on the bus or in the hallways or something of that nature. I just wanted to know where we would capture that.
And then what, go ahead,
Oh,
I'm sorry.
sorry. So we agree, so bullying, I don't want to move to class 2 unless we're done, but it's in class 3.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll bring, I can move on for class 3.
And I was just going to say, one of the things you have to consider is there are cameras.
There are what?
There are
Cameras.
cameras.
Cameras in the halls. So that is a way in which they can look at the footage.
Okay, thank you.
And for class 2, when you get to the classification options, 2 responses, again, they wanted the wording, the following responses are listed as options. And again, parental contact is mandatory.
That's the one.
Yeah, we just trying to.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And also.
And then,
Go ahead.
I didn't mean to cut, and I apologize, I didn't mean to cut you off. And then again, back when she stated the part about the SIT plan and including, instead of, could that also be where going over the rules and expectations be a part of that, if you could list it? Because when you're writing the plan, you should be able to list all of that and make sure you go over this and you do that to make it official, and then they have to come back and recheck to see if this is working and if everything's going according to plan. And you may have to make some adjustments again, depending who the person is, to meet their needs.
So you.
I'm just trying to show the consistency, what we said in 1, to make sure we do it in 2, and really put some meat into that SIT plan to make it work.
So you want to pull out 1 and 2 on these as well?
On every one of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And put that in that SIT plan, so that we can put some meat into it and to make it work.
Okay.
For clarification, on elementary as well, or just middle and high? The reteaching
Well-
classroom
Well,
expectations?
since you have the SIT plan here for elementary for 2, Why not make it consistent?
Okay,
and
so
use it?
1 and 2 throughout,
Yeah.
elementary, middle, high. Could I'm sorry I did not bring this up. At what point, and I'm not laughing because it's very serious, but at what point cursing me out changes from a class 1 to a class 2?
What page are you on?
In general. Class 1, disrespect, negative language is number 2. And 7, obscene language in class 1. And in class 2, obscene language is number 5. So what point does it shift from a class 1 curse out to a class 2 curse out?
Part of the discussion, it's a very good question, thank you, Dr. Part of the discussion with the administrators, teachers, and students, there may be a time where a student has used inappropriate language. It's not directed at anyone, and so that's an opportunity for us to utilize the opportunity to teach. What the expectation is for choice words, especially if the student is frustrated. And so that's why still you want to acknowledge the inappropriate behavior or the language. But when we look at class 2, I think the 3.0, where they might be using the vulgar language toward an adult, especially if they're being redirected. So an adult, any adult, not just a major, might provide redirection. Please run, please walk instead of running. And they turn around and say something that is grossly disrespectful. And that's what moves us from class 1 to class 2.
Okay, respectively disagree with your language. On page 6, under class 1, it says, use of negative language, number 2, actions or physical gestures to teachers, staff, students, and others. So on page 6, number 2, that class 1 doesn't fit just what you just said.
It's a great place for language clarity, Ms. Stewart. Why don't you take a look at that? Because that makes a big point in terms of the consistency. What do we really mean?
So page 6.
Page 6 and,
You're right.
page 6 and 9, clarity.
I used our language and that.
Yeah, so I'm just cursing at the wall.
Right.
But when
That
you,
is helpful feedback, because that's, I wanted to reflect our discussion.
That does say
And I know,
that's what makes that a
I've
class.
been in some of the high school, and I taught middle school, and I know they will use words, but I think we need to kind of crack down on that when you're looking at that, because when they get jobs, the average job is not going to let you talk like that. And I think we set them up for failure. And then when they get a job and you wonder, and I talked to someone, what happened? Well, all I said was, that's why you can't say that on the job. But they just fired me. Yes, because we got to somehow teach them how to plug in. I'm just saying you have to be careful. You know, when in Rome, you do as the Romans. I got a young man a job at the grain elevator, and they fired him for that very thing, because every word was a curse word. And they kept saying, you can't do that. It needs to stop. We talk to you, we're trying to redirect you, we're trying to teach you how to be a man, because most of the men were older. You can't have that kind of conversation. He wouldn't stop. He said he did it all through school. They didn't say much, but stop. But they got rid of him. And it may not sound like a lot, but he was making $17 an hour. For somebody just starting out, was pretty good. But he lost the job because of his vocabulary.
Question, is profanity a major issue among students at the various grade levels within the schools?
Ms. Drew, I would think you and I would see it as problematic. It seems to be a flow of natural language for young people, so I'm hearing you say, how do we shape that? How do we intervene?
I think we shape it by moving
If it's something
to
Move
class
it to
2.
class 2.
then it needs to move to a different level.
I wouldn't move it to class 2 unless it is egregious, like demonstrated towards something. Because the younger generation.
Towards something or towards someone?
a teacher or
Okay.
someone directly, whatever.
Just in casual conversation,
Right.
and Dr.
In
Yeager.
casual conversation. it
In the
should be
classrooms?
used. No, outside the classroom,
jobs,
but
they
it
don't let
is
you
going
use
to
it
be
in
used
casual
if they're
work.
casually talking to each other. If they're casually in their environment, play a song on any popular, you will hear a cuss song and sing along. My music is not as awesome as some would think. And so in saying that, I would say, you know, if it's directed towards someone, yes. But in general, if it's used, oh, shoot, you know, that needs to be redirected. But I just think it needs to be, we need to just think about how egregious it needs to be as far as discipline. Because the first offense, if they get in trouble for it, that should set the precedence, do not use it on school grounds. If they're at an academic game, for instance, and they're in an uproar and they happen to use cuss words toward their own self, again, I don't think that we need to shoot towards a class too for them getting frustrated.
No, I think we're talking classroom behavior here.
Right,
So-
which I'm saying, which
Yeah.
it was directed here, but I'm saying it's okay to leave.
That's like, what I think I'm hearing you saying is, it's almost like if we're sitting in a situation where we're having a conversation and the words flow out of my mouth, is it appropriate for me to do that? No. When I'm sitting in a formal meeting such as, should I use those words? No. We're talking about children, and we have to teach them when it is appropriate to use that language, whether they're in their quiet setting with each other, but once they elevate it to a point where they can be heard, it's an offense.
That's why I'm saying it's okay. I'm agreeing to just to the word, to wordsmith.
Because right now, it's out of control.
That is, okay. I don't want to debate it, but I think it's some wordsmithing that needs to be done, but I think it's a generational thing.
But if you give them the opportunity to utilize those words under certain conditions, they will use it anytime.
How about board, we grapple with this and bring back some potential clarity? We'll be sure we have some millennials and some non-millennials in the conversation.
No, it's not even up for discussion. No, I'm going to be just very
It may not be-
old school,
but I'm
in
not.
classroom, I don't care if you are 3 years old, if you're 30 years old. Just we're establishing code of conduct in
And
this
we still
district's
allow,
classroom.
but we still allow words that I don't feel appropriate when they're reading certain books. So
It's a
therefore,
different context.
but still, we're allowing it, and in some of our books, and even our library says banned books, there are words in there that have cuss words that our children are reading in the classroom.
That's not what we're talking about.
But I'm saying, if we read it in the book and you have a cuss word, but then it's just a difference of thought, because you're still saying that cuss word and it's in a book that's
That's not what
required
we're
reading.
talking about, so yeah, we need to have more discussions. I think it's very clear what we're talking
Right, but
about
I
in a
don't wanna
classroom
waste any more
environment.
time.
No, I mean, we have to work through this, that we're not, in my opinion, the discussions, we're not going to tolerate this type of behavior, because when you go to another school district, you'll get expelled.
You will not. You can go out to Shawnee Mission, you can have students outside, and you can cuss. You can go to Johnson County,
It's
you go to
talking about in a
Independence.
classroom
And I'm
environment.
saying, in that classroom environment, in a lunchroom, you can hear cursing students, and they won't get the
Lunchroom
same.
is not the classroom
All right,
environment.
so classroom is key. Classroom is key, Mrs. Stewart.
Right, but it's still.
Classroom is key.
You go back and curse out the student.
Classroom is key.
No, you can't do that according to number one.
And
Oh,
also
I can't
adults
curse.
hearing it is key.
Number one,
We'll
it
work on it.
says, you
We'll
cannot.
work on it.
Right.
Classroom or adults hearing it, so.
Profanity behavior. You
If you're gonna
cannot
use
go in
it,
the
you better
bathroom and
talk
cuss
quiet.
out any, you can't say any cuss words in the bathroom.
All right,
That's what it
ladies,
says.
I think we've got some guidance. We'll move it. We will move it.
I have, so as we're wrapping up class 3, I know that I wanted to jump on questions for Perry with regard to understanding.
So I wanted to ask me, Perry, around the elimination of the sentences as short-term under class 2 definitions and explanations. When we are striking short-term suspension may be applied as the last response only when all school interventions are insufficient to address the inappropriate behavior. And we're replacing that with, what was the?
Short-term suspension may be applied as an option, but not limited to all in-school interventions or.
No, it's as an option, period, I believe,
as an
Ms. Stewart.
option, period, whatever, as an option.
So just so we're clear, that short-term suspension can be applied regardless if it's the first incident of that infraction or whether it's the third incident of that infraction. So I'm going back to what Mr. Brown was, he raised the question around consistency. And so if defiance of authority will warrant an out-of-school suspension in one building and not in another,
It's not being consistent.
we leave it open as just an option without having applied interventions before going to a suspension. How do we create that consistency if it's just left open as an option?
Well, you have a list of options, and it depends upon what's going on and how they're dealing with it. Because I'm just quoting what was quoted to me, that they felt that they needed options. It shouldn't be a 1, 2, 3, 4. Because again, it brings up what you said, it varies. So they felt they had more flexibility if it's just added to the list. It doesn't necessarily mean that's what they're going to use, but they wanted some options instead of just saying, you got to do from 1 and work your way down to 10.
I just want to make sure I point that out because it's a little slippery slope there when we start to leave it open as just an option. Because it might be a suspendable offense in one building and it's not a suspendable offense in another building.
And I would even say not in one building to another building, it could be within the same building, in the same class.
Well, that's what people are saying now about the way you have it now. I mean, they've said the same thing. Parents have, because it's not a consistent thing. Even though you write it down as being consistent, it varies from building to building. I had a conversation with some people and we talked about when we have orientation for the teachers when you first come back. Well, the buildings I've been in, they read the code of conduct from the beginning to the end. I mean, we went over every section. Then I had somebody say, well, we didn't do that. You went over every section? Now, I'm assuming everybody's doing that. So that's a problem we have as a district. One group is doing it, because they've been told when you have those meetings, you go over, you make sure everybody understands. And then somebody tells me, no, we didn't do that part. All we had to do was this.
You could.
So, I mean, either way we go, it's a problem. I'm not saying that, but I was just going by what I was told from administrators.
The administrator to have discretion.
Again, I think what I heard from that is going to be
That's fine.
once we
That's
get
what-
past this part, we can present our implementation to the policy and how to.
In relation to that, I like what you were reading before when you first read it, and they corrected you as a last response, but not limited to. I think that might cover what he was
Both,
suggesting.
okay.
That might
Thank
be
you.
an option,
Thank you.
just a suggestion.
Oh, no, that's good.
Could you explain to me, and I'll just say page 11, what is a privilege? And then what is, I'm sorry, were you finished?
Yeah.
Oh, what's a privilege and what's a temporary restriction of attendance at school-sponsored activity? Oh, I'm wrong. What number are you doing?
What
6,
number?
on page 11, if, under middle school. Loss of a privilege, number 6, and then number 11 is loss of an athletic activity privilege. Is not number 11 the same as number 6?
So I think that goes back to Dr. Lansing where we can provide some clarity, and I think providing, again, allowing the feedback to administrators, and I think how they see it, but I, again, appreciate just how it's read or interpreted. I think they're referencing what might be like a sports event, if they lost a privilege, or perhaps a school dance, but then the loss of privilege, there could be something going on during the day when we think about those incentives we talk about, if they have like school bucks, or they're doing something to recognize students doing well, that might be a loss of privilege, and or field trip, any of those things that are an option for them, but I do think it's an opportunity for us to be specific about what that means or what that looks like, so thank you.
Because the same thing would apply to high school for 6 and 9. Could there be more clarity for that? And it wouldn't hurt when you talk about the time. How long is this? Is it 2 weeks? Is it 4 weeks? So that way, it's clear, the parents know. They said, we're going to do number 6. That means for 2 weeks, you lose privilege to attend any sporting events, or the temporary restriction, is it 4 weeks? I don't know, but it would help if it was more clarity in the high school as well.
Thank you. Moving to class 3.
Clear, concise, and
This is on page
consistent.
13. And so these are behaviors that seriously jeopardize school order and security. And so Our recommendation as it stands and how it has been in the policy, that fighting has moved to class 3. It was in class 2. That's how our current policy is this year. And that exciting to fight moved from class 2 to class 3. And now when we think about options, again, we'll allow the same language that we did in class 1 and 2. But now, as also included, it's not just short term, but long term.
And there was a question, because they wondered, is this grammatically correct accordingly? The responses, consequences, is that supposed to be written like that?
No, it's a typo thing.
Oh, okay, I mean, I didn't know.
This is our draft, no, I mean,
Oh,
we've been
okay.
working and we're supposed to, so thank you.
Okay, because they asked, was that meant
That
to
cutting
be
and
written?
pasting is often not your friend,
Okay.
so it's our
Okay.
draft, so thank you.
So which word is omitted?
Yeah, consequences. Responses in class 3 may include, yes.
And then they asked the question, could 3 and 20 be combined? Oh, wait. I'm sorry. Scratch that.
Okay.
Yeah. 10, they wondered, could that go under 3? I mean, go under 4, excuse me.
So 10 is a listed
No,
drug use.
no, 5.
3 and 2.
5.
5, 10, and
Oh,
5.
5, okay. 3 and 4.
Oh, 10 and 5, okay, I'm so sorry.
Okay, and I'm sorry. Help me out.
Number 5 and 10 combine then, Ms.
Yes, ma'am.
Page?
To make one.
No, drug selling.
Cannabinoid. Is that a word?
So the difference is the drug and drug paraphernalia, and number 10 is the illegal drug. So I mean, I would probably need some guidance on how to combine those because they're two different.
Drugs.
You could have 5A, 5B. They're just similar categories. Makes sense to see them together.
Okay.
And then there was a question about 14 and 15. Would they belong under 4 instead of where they are?
Class 4, Ms. Page?
Yes, ma'am.
14 and 15?
Yes.
So, Mr. Goheen, a point of clarity, we think of class 4s as criminal acts.
Yes.
Would number 14 and 15 fit in that category as a criminal act?
14 probably would. I'm not sure about 15. I suppose if 15 is criminal, it's a misdemeanor, and I'm not sure it is.
Why don't we check on that one?
Okay.
But we can certainly move 14 then
14,
to class 4.
Possession of a weapon at school would be,
Cannabinoid is a class of chemicals.
that's criminal.
And then they asked about 19 and 20. Would they not fall under 4? Yeah.
You could, the one place where he had a bit of a distinction on class 3 and 4, and this isn't set in stone, this is just how it's set up right now. If I remember correctly, we haven't done class 4 yet. But I think it requires a referral to the law enforcement for a class 4 offense, which is why I think there were some things that were criminal in nature that were left in class 3. Check that right.
Class 4, Mr. Green, are considered criminal acts, and that's going to depend on the...
Well, I know, but there's some things in class 3 that could be criminal offenses that might, if I remember correctly, it's not.
Required referral, no, with the juvenile justice reform, you know, they require that we intervene on many of those. So, Ms. Page, I'm sorry, number 19 and what was?
19
and 20.
Class 4.
Move to class 4.
Check for clarity on that.
So 15, 19, and 20.
Yeah, 14, 15, 19, 20.
I'm going to check on 14.
14,
Okay.
15, 19, and 20?
Yes.
Mr. Wilkie, number 14,
I'm sorry, I meant 15 was the one I was checking.
15, 19, 20, right?
14, 15, 19, 20.
14, 19, and 20 are moving.
14, not 15.
15 I'm going to check on, that's the one for the fire alarm, basically. Which I think you could move, but I don't know.
So number 19 and 20, you think are fine to move into the category of criminal act? Certainly 20 seems to be. 19,
I mean,
use of, it says
certainly,
use of, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, you're actually using it, not just,
Well, use it, number 19?
19 and 20.
It also is possession.
well, that needs, we need to reword that because the way it's written, I'm not sure it.
So maybe we need to reword 19 to carve out the word possession.
I mean, I'm not sure if you catch a kid at school with a
Stick of dynamite.
stick of dynamite's
Yeah.
explosive, but if you catch a kid with
Firecracker.
or a sparkler, I'm not sure it's a crime. That's the distinction I'm drawing. It would certainly violate our rules. It certainly would warrant a student being punished for doing that. But I'm trying to make the distinction between what's truly criminal and what's, violation of the rules, but not necessarily criminal. So, yeah, if you bring a stick of dynamite to school, yeah, that's criminal.
Yeah.
You bring a sparkler to school, I'm not sure.
Or can you just remove explosive possession and put it in
That's kind of
class
what
4?
that's kind of what I was thinking, yeah.
Well, they were concerned.
But it's a firecracker.
Firecracker either.
Firework. A
It says
firework.
fireworks, but it says it's limited, includes but not limited. Gotcha.
Yeah, so there's some things that might be considered fireworks that I'm not sure would be criminal. They certainly violate our rules, I'm just not sure you could charge a kid
And
with
just the
possession.
use of explosive possession. Take fireworks out.
Right. That might be.
And then you just have a clarifying question.
That's your job.
14, considered criminal or violating the criminal code.
Yeah, if you possess a weapon on school property, that's.
I think this was intended to be just for those items not defined as a weapon under the Kansas State statute. Like,
It doesn't say that though, so. You may be right at what it was intended to do.
Couldn't a firecracker be a weapon? You throw a firecracker at somebody.
Yeah, I mean, you're getting into, the problem is when you start getting into stuff that's criminal, the statutes and what the prosecutors and police have to deal with becomes pretty technical in terms of, they got to prove intent, they got to prove that the kid knew it was a weapon, they got to prove that they knew it was illegal, those kinds of things. That can get kind of hard depending on the age of the kid you got in play and a lot of other factors. Obviously, the 4th of July is in the middle of the school year, so it's not very likely, but say some kid's got a jacket on and has a firecracker in the jacket and you realize he had it in there. I mean, I know that sounds silly. Is that something that automatically shifts to a class 4? Or is that something where you want a little bit more discretion? Because with each one of these levels, you take away more discretion from your administrators in terms of what they can or can't do. So
you have to provide clarity that use of the explosive, not just having it.
Right.
So
I just want to make sure I understand correctly. So 14, 15, 19, and 20, like wordsmithing on 19, but I also just want to ask for a point of clarification for 14. The possession of handling of a weapon or item, it also includes that looks like a weapon on school property. And moving these 4 to class 4 is an automatic expulsion, which is a calendar year. So I just want to make sure that I understand correctly what's being moved to class 4 and what also includes.
Maybe wordsmith that because if it looks like a weapon.
he could get shot.
A lot of kids are being shot having toy guns, and they think they're guns.
Expel them for what looks like a weapon.
Yes.
Well, the reason they brought that up, because they said it gets to be a fuzzy kind of issue, and it's not clear.
So let me just say something about the difference between class 3 and class 4 as I understand it. And again, this isn't set in stone, this is just how you have it set up right now. If it's a class 3 offense, your administrators have some discretion to do something less than a long-term suspension. If you go to a class 4, they don't. So that's part of the distinction between the two categories. So your administrators lose discretion if you classify it as class 4, so it becomes an automatic, at least long-term and potentially expulsion. And there's some things that have to be in there, like the Gun-Free School Act, so it has to be in, that's by statute. But that's the decision you guys are making, and however you make it is certainly fine.
No, well, that's what we
Yeah.
want some clarity. Help us.
Right.
Okay.
So when you're moving it from class 3 to class 4, what you're doing is you're taking away discretion from your administrators on how they can handle the violations of those situations. So have to prove that those violations occurred, but if they establish that a violation of something in class 4 occurred,
They have to do it.
then it's going to be long-term suspension or expulsion, and potentially, and it also requires a police report. So those are the things that happen when it's class 4. If it's class 3, they can do lesser. They could do short-term suspension. They could do an ISS. They could do something that is not quite as severe as you're automatically out for an extended period of time. So that's the choice you're making if you move something from class 3 to class 4. Doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. I just want to make sure you understand the ramifications of doing it.
I can see under those conditions, maybe 14 and 15 could stay, but 19 and 20 has to go.
But reword it.
You don't.
I think we need to have a little bit more discussion because in 2018, I almost take 14 as maybe not going ahead and expelling the kid, but person, identity, whatever. But with the weapon, they could get shot. And so it's kind of like being proactive to save the person's life. So I'm going probably much too far. But,
Well, maybe rewording that number.
Yeah.
But I still think that, although that is quite possible, 14 gives that, allows for discretion and not automatic expulsion.
Well, it has to be separated because possession of a weapon, that is one thing.
But not an item.
And then an item looks like a weapon is another. So-
Because you don't know what they're going to do with it. So, and in this day and age with weapons,
But again, if it's accidental and someone's parent accidentally put it in the bag, now that student, am I right or not? If the parent accidentally put a gun in the child's bag and now they come to school and it's found, that child is now expelled, rather than if it stays here and it's explained, there's more ability for us to do something.
If it's a gun, they're gone, period.
Gun, period.
Something,
No, it says look like a gun.
It's a knife. Stop. Just sorry, not a gun.
So-
A knife.
I mean, you get into the Gun-Free School Act, and basically, if
Not
it's-
a gun, a
if
knife.
there's certain types of weapons, which include
That's
guns
right.
and several other things,
Right.
it's an automatic.
Switchblades are an automatic, but a knife in and of itself would not be.
Right.
So why don't we take a shot at separating the language here for number 14 and 15, and then bring it back with the board to have more options on where you want to
Including
put
throwing
it.
stars.
Yes, which are now legal to possess.
Yeah.
So we're
Throwing
in an
stars.
environment that creates some challenge here.
okay.
But we'll bring it back.
Look at the language for 14.
Reword.
15, 19 and 20.
I think I'm hearing 19 and 20 are to move to class
That's what I
4.
was hearing.
Okay, just want to make sure, okay.
But we'll look at the wording on 14 and we'll get clarity about 15, whether or not it is a criminal act.
Firecrackers go automatic explosion.
Thank you, board. If you'll move to our,
Can we still get the consistency?
Right.
As the following responses are listed as option.
Right.
Criminal contact is mandatory.
yes, I intended to put those in all three,
Okay.
yes.
And with the SIT thing again,
I'm going to be teaching included there so the language is clear.
thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
And you're going to provide clarity on a loss of a privilege or a loss of an athletic activity.
Yes, yes, yes. And on page 18, number 3 is what has been moved from class 3 to class 4, the false reports of bomb or school threats. And then, of course, the other feedback that we just received And these are behaviors that are considered criminal acts, seriously jeopardizing the security. And then the responses are the long-term or the expulsion.
And the administrators had a problem with number 7, with the word significant. They felt that should be struck.
So I will have to defer to Greg or even perhaps Chief, because this
Number
when it
7,
comes to
class
criminal
4.
arrest, I have to.
Number 7, class 4.
Number 7.
7, where it's physical assault, where we involve law enforcement. And so part of the language for our guidance here, since it's a criminal act, is intentional causing significant bodily harm to an individual.
The word significant is what's on the table.
I'm not entirely sure that to use the word to define itself, that it's particularly significant to have the word significant in there. I think the intention was to distinguish that from some sort of incidental bodily harm. You know, I think anytime you have somebody that is involved in physical altercation, they would have some injury. Even if they get pushed against the locker, I'm going to have some injury. Whether that requires any kind of medical attention or anything is a little bit different. So I don't know that it matters. I think it was just something to give people some degree, again, because we're talking about an area where it's an automatic, as opposed to I have to do it anytime there's an allegation of I got hurt.
Well, they were saying the word significant is
Subjective.
kind of loosey-goosey.
It is subjective. I agree with that.
And
We
they
try to see if we
thought,
come up with a better
take
word
it
for
out,
that.
and if it just said causing bodily harm.
Yeah, do you need
Use
any
the yeah.
qualifier?
No.
So just causing bodily harm.
Yeah.
Just strike significant.
And then they had a question. Don't these 4 offenses have police reports? They had,
Which one are you talking
like,
about?
when it says classification 4 responses on 19, don't they generally have, they
Wait a
said
minute, you going backwards?
Yeah, it's on page 9. Oh, I'm
Number
sorry.
4.
I was using the old one to write on.
They require
Okay.
a police report.
Yeah, they were just wondering, is that right the way it's listed?
I think that's more for parents, so they know.
Oh, okay.
If one of
Gotcha,
these things
gotcha,
happen,
gotcha.
parent, this
Which
will
one are you
happen.
looking at?
Well, they were just wondering why that was listed there like that. Okay.
And that word progressive is going to come out, so then.
Right.
Yeah, it'll
Okay.
be okay.
Gotcha.
On page 21, the United Way resource, is that what we're paying for, the United Way connection? That special service, or, because we have a partnership with United Way?
But not for this. Yeah, but it's free. Community resource.
Part of our reason why we're providing that is because the resources changed, and at one time we provided, tried to provide a list of options, resources, and communities, but part of the role of United Way is they maintain, it's constantly active, and then it's, the options stay current, as opposed to once, like, say I type this and the board approves it, and then that agency can potentially no longer offer those resources. So this way, 201 allows us to stay up to date.
Seems to get through with this one
Good.
before we move on.
And the P3 application, I had mentioned, is that something that's going to be a staple of ours as a,
What page is she on?
something to put in here under a resource, or no, or?
I was going to, when I presented, we included in our parent handbook, I just wasn't utilizing this time, it was just for the code, so.
Okay.
At least that's what I thought I understood, include it where we're including the other resources, including the P3.
Board, I want to congratulate you. We made a lot of progress on this evening, so thank you for your conversation and your work, Dr.
Thank
Wynn.
you. We appreciate that.
Did you have something else, Dr. Wynn?
Oh, just that she captured, again, on page 19, following responses or options in progressive order.
Yes, I did, yeah, yes, ma'am.
Okay, before we go on, let's take a 5 or 7 minute break.
No, let's keep working.
I don't know if we gotta go to bed.
Any place in here attempted suicide?
We gotta go to bed.
Where would you see that?
Would that be possible?
I know you were.
Well, you wouldn't want to put them out for that. The resources are in the parent
Well, you've
handbook.
been trying to long
The resources
time.
are in the parent handbook, but
Watch that.
I'd love to think about.
I don't know, it just popped in my brain.
I'll make note of that and ask the town staff to talk about it.
It's a behavior
Dr. Lane,
is
Yes, ma'am.
can I ask you something?
Always.
I saw in the news this weekend, they got we were one of the districts chosen to be in some sort of mental health program.
Remember when David and Dr. Wynn were talking about that?
Okay.
We've written into it, but we don't know anything about the parameters or anything.
But they were saying it was for foster kids. Is it just limited to, or is it open up? That's what.
It's targeted at foster kids, and we have 213, but we don't know any of the details, so.
Okay, because I was thought, why wouldn't they open it up for everybody?
Well, I think the part of the pilot is to show how needed this is and expand.
And, okay, because I was wondering when he was collecting data, can he show us if any of those kids were having problems? And if they fit into that, because we got so many of them, they've seen so much in their young
We
age
can isolate to that.
to see, does it fit? And if we need to provide,
Is it working? How do we?
Yeah.
You did great work.
serious.
Well, I was trying.
You did.
But I had it. I was mad at myself because I didn't bring it last
That's okay.
week.
We needed
But I thought maybe if we could have more time. I think we need a little bit more time for a lot of stuff.
I know,
We're
we just have
rushing
a lot of
through.
stuff.
But I did go and ask them,
That's good.
how do we make this work?
That's good.
Because they asked, we almost need an alternative school for the elementary and something for the middle school.
Come up in the budget.
Yeah.
We need some alternatives.
Yeah,
Whether it's a
yeah,
school
to give
that's
them something, because you're not throwing them away, you're just trying to figure out what makes their day better.
It's interesting to think about when you isolate how many kids are causing this disruption and how much of the disruption that small group is causing. So we've got to do something to get them where they need to be.
Yeah.
But you did good work on this. Good for you. That was excellent.
Well, I just wanted to know, because I mean, they say they don't get a voice.
They get
And
a
I'm
voice.
just, well, I know,
They
I
can
just
tell you
said,
they
but
don't.
perception,
I know. They can-
but at least it would try and help us.
Lots of
I don't
avenues
know.
for voice.
Yeah.
That's good.
So you know how when you just have to work it out.
That's right. Very good.
Well, you can't ever forget me, right? I'm your student. Every time, no way. Every time I'm like, who's really? I'm your student. Yes, ma'am. So how they come? Yes. I didn't even know the connection until they came. I love it. And wait, he said my wife. Oh, he did? Yes, he did. That's how we have. You have to love your family. You don't get to choose them. Well, yes. So we're connected. Yes, we go to the same church, and he's saying my one in-law was making another young lady part. Yes. And I love their cute little baby. So yes. So every time I get up there presenting, I'm like, I just want to do some crystals to this class. I feel a kinship, right? It's good to see you. Dr. Lynn said I'm definitely I'm bringing this back next Yeah, so I'll work with this group and run the link page, and then I'll just look for you to help us with that. Number 15, I can't think of the infraction right now, but okay. All right, thank you, sir.
That's right. I'm telling you, she needs a driver one day. Oh, did you go down there? Did you hang out in the cold weather? There you go. I bet you did. That's a good observation.
Yes. It was good to see up there. And then I had to leave and go out to community college for the graduation.
Oh, good, good.
And then I came back.
Right. In the back, yeah. It was nasty cold that day, though.
Oh, it was.
Yeah, let's see, they gave us 21,576, yeah.
But again, it's the weights. It's average.
Oh, yeah, that's 35,255.
Yeah, the weight 30. That's your.
Yeah.
I said it's the weight that you.
Yeah. So, do you, and this is probably a stupid, well, here's a question. What is the value of one student weighted? See, if you can't give that because if it's an ESL,
It depends on weight.
okay. Well, okay, Dr. Lane was saying this number probably is not going to be saved, but
I think we're going to be at, that's all inclusive of the 1.5%, we're going to be about 1.5.
$4 million less?
And that's why you hear me talk about the importance of cash balance.
Wanda, you better hurry up.
Sometimes they have to go up with the Republican, so it depends on how the importance of the audit.
That doesn't make sense. I mean, it doesn't make sense if you are, what number did you use? 35 point what? Oh, so you're talking about 1,000 students. I mean, I'm sorry, 1,000. 1,000 costs $4 million?
Because each of the weights are different.
And yeah, I know that, so we don't have to have that conversation. No, at the end of the day, it's how much money we have. That's all it
Okay, where's my people?
I don't know.
Oh, boy. Yes, you call me. That's right. I'm in the school board
More people are here.
I got money. I must take
Hi, Melissa. Okay.
because you're old. Because you're old.
You ready?
Yeah. You're not. Mr. Brown's not back.
The one that's not here.
Yeah, she's right there.
Oh, she hasn't left yet.
No, she left.
And he should have been back. All he got to do is go when he should have.
No idea. Don't want to think about it.
Okay, so Miss Stacy.
Yes.
Let me give you this scenario. So little Joy brings a toy gun to school, and little Joy is standing
Come back in
next
the
to
session,
her
please.
precious daughter.
All right, board. Dr. Mather and Ms. Woodbury are going to try to keep our energy high as we work through some significant budget conversations. So Dr. Mather.
So good evening again, board. Now we're going to ask you to kind of shift your thinking from discipline to numbers. Okay. And we're going to walk through quite a bit of information. I really hope that by the end of this afternoon or early evening, that we can actually get to some decision points. To some point, I'll make a recommendation to superintendent, board president, that we can take executive session to have some conversation regarding some potential expenditures. I will try to get through this fairly quickly. I know that, as Dr. Wynn said, you all aren't afraid of data. There's a lot of numbers here.
Okay.
So,
got
hopefully
5,000
slow me
years of
down,
education.
stop me if
And a
we
lawyer.
don't understand something, but there's a lot of information. So, we're going to get started. Should I take offense that everybody left just before the budget part? Should there be a whole audience like left? I don't know. So for this afternoon, what I want to do is you've heard me talk, when we talked about the budget planning. The outcomes that we want to accomplish this afternoon are just revisiting what the current board priorities are, but what falls under those priorities, I always oftentimes refer to as parameters that you all establish in the development of the budget. So we'll be looking at that. I want to look at and understand the new Senate Bill 423 and the implications that it has on us as a school system, at least how it currently stands, we think. And we know there'll be some adjustments potentially to that, based on what they intended to pass and what they actually passed, and some clarification. I want to revisit the importance of the cash balance, not only in your entire general fund, but very specifically to the local option budget, the supplemental general fund, and make decisions regarding the need to put cash in there in order to maintain our mill levy. And then also finally make decisions and provide direction around any other considerations with budgetary implications. In this presentation, I gave you all a hard copy, big pages so you could see it. I tried to capture everything I've heard you all talk about at different times of interests or needs, and we'll need to make decisions around those types of things as we start putting this budget together. So I'm going to try to get us to do decisions. You're going to keep hearing me say that because we're at a juncture that we don't know when the budget forms will be released. At this point, it all depend on what happens with Senate Bill 423 and the court's decision. They have typically released our budget forms in, well, I don't know, there's no typical in the last 3 or 4 years actually, so I think last year was July before they released it. We have a very short period of time to get the budget put together as a result of that. Hopefully it'll be a little sooner, but until the courts make some decisions, we won't have it. So that's kind of a lot to accomplish. We'll try to do it as efficiently as we possibly can. These are the board priorities as they currently stand. Just to reiterate what I just said a moment ago, everything that goes in your budget, try to fit under these priorities. So it makes sense that we can meet the needs and put the resources in the priorities that the board has. And I'll kind of show you some of the things that you requested or asked about. I've tried to align with these priorities. Doesn't mean I always get them right, but I think I'm pretty close. You can certainly make changes. I'll put your budget policy up here. This is the budget planning policy. I'd like to connect it back to what you recommend in your policies that you authorize superintendent and her staff then to put together your budget and present it back to you. So that's what we will do. We, at the last budget meeting, I think reviewed all of the funds. So you know there's hundreds of funds. It's over a $300 million budget, over 20,000 budget numbers in this budget. I think it's a 200-page document when we put the budget together. So it's pretty massive. So I'm going to try to shrink it down so we can talk about what I think are your priorities. But you can certainly correct it. The operating budget policy is being CDT, that's simply that whatever budget we put together on your behalf, we have to follow that budget, and we do. This is a slide that I put together with a few modifications at the last budget meeting, things I had forecasted for you. So I'm just setting the stage again. The parameters that we just talked about, looking at 423 and its implications, really important decision. Hopefully tonight will be on your local option budget, cash needed, and then all the other funding considerations. Same slide I provided to you before, just putting it back in front of you again. Also provided this slide to you, but I've changed it slightly so it looks a little different. I'm trying to figure out a way in which to put over $300 million into some kind of categorical process for us to look at a glance, if you will. We do publish, as part of your board policy, a document called At a Glance, and it disaggregates this data in 50,000 different ways, and that's accessible to you. But I just Kristen and I took the budget, tried to collapse it into some major areas. So the first area on the top, you've seen this before, just all the transfer funds. So those are funds that are transferred out of the general fund into those particular funds, and I shared with you what all those funds are, again, at the last budget meeting that we had. Those are all driven by audit. They're all driven by number of kids in each of those respective funds, with the exception of parents and teachers, but it is transferred out of budget, and it's not driven by the audit. And the homeless program is not driven by the audit as far as weights, but we have to fund by state statute transportation for the homeless program, so we have to make sure we budget for that.
Dr. Mathers, is parents and teachers, is that supplemented by a grant?
They actually have grant funding, and then the district supplements that by a couple $100,000 on top of it.
Okay.
So they have multiple grants, actually, probably
Gotcha.
3 or 4 right now.
Okay.
But state funding supplemented by grants and by district funding. So that's the first part of the general fund. The second part, I just call it transfers. The second part, I just reference it as operations, because call it whatever you want, not really sure. It is kind of a potpourri of things, from salaries, and that's not all the salaries, because you have to look at all your funds to extract all your salaries. So I don't want to, I mean, it's much more than that dollar figure. But that are specific in the general fund, not other funds. That's the amount, health insurance premiums, utilities, early separation, all of the district's insurance, policies that protect the school district from auto and general liability, property, all that stuff. And then there's liquidated accrual process.
Can you help me
That's kind of
understand?
funding that's all taken care of. Those are obligations, I guess is the best way to put it, that we have to continue to fund in order to support the operations.
Please help me understand the 1.7 million for early separation?
Yeah, you want to describe that, Kristen, the early separation program?
The early separation program here is talking about the board policy we have for teachers who retire before they're 62. So there's a formula in the negotiated agreement that calculates how much years of experience and salary, how much they'll continue to receive every month until they turn 62. They have to retire with CAPERS as well.
So it's their pay that they get when they separate early. And we have a liability that we have to carry for that and try to estimate that out.
And is that what, I know when I came out, we got it. If you were your age and your time equal 85 or 80 or, no, it was 85.
It's 85 points for retirement for CAPERS, right? But this is a separate early up to the age of 62, so. It's been there for a long time, but that's what helps us pay the teachers, so that's that liability.
And this is just a generic number, right? Or this was last year's?
No, that's the actual budget that
That's
we put
this
in
year?
there.
This year?
17, 18. Now, again, we have to estimate some of those figures when we get to actuals by year end, because you don't know exactly who's going to take advantage of the early separation program until they make personal decisions to do so.
Right, so these people are eligible.
And what's cyber insurance? Cyber?
Yep, cyber insurance. Yep, it's a policy the school district carries in case we get hacked, for a better sake of a word, I guess, and all of our data gets extracted and taken out. So we are protected as a school system. So 47% of your overall general fund budget, this is just the general fund, is for the transfers that go out into the respective funds, driven by audit for the most part. 40% of the budget is that operations stuff, that we just talked about. And the remaining part of that, 14%, are more departmental kinds of budgets that probably have a little bit more flexibility in them. Gives you an idea by department, kind of where we have funds at located right now. All budgets, as you remember, that we have all budget managers in the districts, both schools and department directors have to submit budgets based on what they need to efficiently support their departments and or schools. I just wanted to break that down for you. Second page of that is what I gave to you at the last board meeting. Again, the only difference on this is that on this particular slide, I added the middle column, which is your local option budget, which is your supplemental general fund, and your capital outlay budget that we budgeted at 9.8 million.
Question. When it comes to supplies per building, is that something the principal, the paper, the tag book, all that stuff, do they have to decide what they need in their building? And how much, is that based on what they request?
Yep, that's based on what they decide that they need in regards to their supply line item. And they fit within, we use zero-based budgeting as a kind of a premise on how to establish that, but we really give them a starting point, so it's not truly zero-based budget. So if they can fit it within their budget requirements, that's their decision. So if they put $2,000 or $10,000. Also, teacher supplies are part of that as well, and each of the respective budget managers makes that determination. To cover classroom materials as well, looking at supplies.
So they do, would the teacher get a chance to submit what they wanted?
In some buildings, they actually do that. I know for a fact that they actually submit lists to principals. I can't attest if every principal does that or not. I know that we've been requesting information on some of the encumbered POs because we have April 1st is our deadline for folks to close out their budgets or start closing out their budgets so we can finish up the school year. And Kristen was just sharing with me that she was asking principals and people she talked to, hey, your teachers have supplies? And they're like, yes, they got their supplies. That's just a general statement.
Okay,
so
because
not for everybody. Yeah.
No, because some are complaining.
Sure.
About not, we want more hands-on, but they end up having to buy the supplies themselves. So I didn't know how that works.
Yeah, I think that, again, we try to encourage all budget managers to look at that. I would venture to say the majority of them provide funds at some level. I imagine that varies based on that particular budget manager for school supplies. Also know, having a daughter who's a teacher, that doesn't matter. She's going to probably buy stuff for the classroom. You all can attest to that probably.
But that's not.
She does too. It's frustrating, but they do have money in their budgets for that. And they can ask for a certain amount of money. Now, we're not going to let schools go without paper and all that kind of stuff. So there's been oftentimes that we literally buy paper by the truckloads because it's cheaper for us to buy it by the truckload, and we'll dispense that out. Yeah.
But there are
It's not
limitations.
restricted in their budget. Yeah,
As far as what they
there's
can
somewhat of a limitation. I mean, school A can't say they need a half a truckload of paper, and school B get 10 boxes.
And I did ask, remember we have that supply list that we sell or give away, and I asked, is it an opportunity for our teachers to reuse it or our buildings? And Dr. Lane said that those items were not available.
Well, they've outlived their shelf
usable, they
life.
are. We will redistribute
Teachers have said they don't want them, they're that old, so.
And my other question was the credit card situation. I guess I want to know more about, do we just give the credit cards and they're expected to stay at a limit, or?
We've pulled those back in, so there are no more credit cards for purchases. They can go through Kristen's office and Wayne's office to get support.
So going forward from this point forward?
Right, but no, there wasn't an unlimited amount. It had to be tied to their budget in the past. They used them only for what was in their approved budget.
Okay.
But we're not using that resource anymore.
Well, I'd like to follow up with that. I think the board policy says something like in July or something, when we reorganize, we revisit that procurement policy. And so I would like to answer you that I think we need to revisit that policy, because if we don't say anything, then how it's used can be used how it's used, unless we look at the policy and determine some parameters. And full transparency, I've been very vocal about credit card usage. And so I accept your answer and accept your answer, but I don't think going forward we can stop at that answer.
Yeah,
Because it's a
absolutely. You wanna
policy,
keep
it's a board
looking at your
policy.
Keep in mind that that policy drove the utilization of the P card, the procurement card, purchasing card. And there were strict limits, they couldn't spend over that, had to be in their budget. I mean, that was, they have to approve. It's not like we just hand them a Visa card and say, hey, go use it, however you want, when you want, for whatever you need. It was approved and then went through that kind of approval process that's in your procurement policy that we reviewed with you. So you're absolutely right. That is where you need to review it. Based on fiscal concerns, we pulled back. I made the decision to pull back P cards at this particular moment. We made lots of fiscal decisions in the last 4 years. One where I eliminated petty cash from buildings because it was just too hard to manage petty cash and people were getting themselves in trouble with it, for example. P cards is another choice at this point, wanting to try to get a better control around that. Could be driven by perhaps the policy. But we had a pretty lengthy manual that outlined the use of those P cards.
So Lakeboro is updating that to include the.
Right, but we approved the procurement policy. I think we need to also look at
We'll have to update it.
Right, and I'd like to reserve the right to go back to these school-based whatever budgets in response to you, Ms. Page, because when I questioned certain expenditures, the only response I got last year was that it was budgeted. So I think we need to look closer at those budgets that are submitted to you. I mean, how many budget managers do we have?
Well, there's one per school, so every principal would be a budget manager. You
Okay.
also have one per department. So anybody who is responsible for overseeing a budget.
So what, I'm telegraphing right now that I will ask us to look by policy or parameters closer at those submitted budgets. And I'll phrase it by policy so that it won't be very, I mean, you won't have to say that you're crossing that line into day-to-day activities, but that by policy. So
Well,
I'll
those
telegraph you now.
No, I appreciate that. Those budgets come in, so you know, they're going to be working on their budgets right now for 18-19. They'll be coming in and we'll be reviewing them based on some of your all's decisions on how we can spread the money out that we have. And they will have to be approved in August for them. They essentially get sent in somewhat of an approved budget, although it's not officially approved until the board approves your budget, which is in August. So all of that has to take place up till August. August 25th, we have to submit to the county clerk. So asking afterwards, the reason you're getting the response, it's in their budget, is because that was in their budget and it was approved in their budget. And that timeline doesn't change for the coming year either. So if there's something specific, you know, please, by all means, ask what that is. But I just wanted to point that out so it didn't come as a surprise back.
For full disclosure too, the last board didn't want any details.
Yeah.
Clearly stated too when we had the budget workshop. In essence, took an informal vote, one by one. Don't want, and I think Ms. Jones, you can remember, don't want details, so that the pushback was because I was asking details, and so which I thought was a really flippant reply, well, it's budgeted. Okay, well then I'm suggesting we get in front of that train instead of watching it at the end. So I'm just letting you know now. Thank you.
So we'll need to schedule that either next month or in June when it makes sense, if you want to look at those budgets prior to your approval of your budget.
Right.
So we'll look at the timeline and figure out when to bring that to you.
Okay, and we'll kind of get back to that because all of this has to kind of start to unfold as we grow closer to that August.
I'm sorry. Go back to that other slide. Are you saying that this square that says LOB, you are taking the 1.358 from the LOB, transferring to the bilingual fund? Is that how that translates
That's
out?
part of the district subsidy right there, that we take that 1.3 million and it goes into the bond. 4 million for special education, salaries, and curriculum and instruction, and then subs, and that's your budget authority of 52 million.
And how do you determine those specific expenditures?
Goes back to that zero-based budget on what departments need, what they're requesting in order to function and develop, provide the resources and services to their department. And we have to take all of that information, everything that you all want to put in your budget, and take our $325 million and spread it out in a way that balances what our budget authority is for the LOB and our budget authority for the general fund.
Okay, for example, there's $4 million for special ed. Run that through what you just said.
So say special ed budget is $12 million. Let's say it's not that, let's say it's 20 million because it's higher.
Right.
So let's say it's $20 million and we get $16 million in state aid for special ed.
Oh, that's how
The
you-
district's got to
you're backfilling
subsidize
it.
that $4 million or special ed has to cut their program and services to certain students. Now they're
Which you
required
can't
to
do.
provide student services by statute, right, under special education. So the district is currently subsidizing that program by actually more than $4 million, but that's an example of describe that. So we have to come up with where's that money going to come from, out of the general fund or the LOB.
Okay, so if you're going to get like 82% state aid, what does this $4 million do? Take it up to 92?
No, got to separate those things. So if you're getting 82% state aid, you're talking about for special ed funding
Correct.
specifically. Actually, the 16 million that they get in their state aid is the 82%. I haven't added the 4 million in, but I bet it wouldn't take it to their full 92. That's what they're supposed to get, and they never have ever got it.
So Dr. Nguyen, the $4 million is to fill the gap in what they need between revenue and expenses.
That's one portion of it, yes.
Expenses.
Yeah. So their
Okay.
budget.
Since Mr. Smith is sitting there, did you find out if the Clayon 15% at risk from the LOB, is there a number they should go there, or we just have to wait and find out? From the LOB, you remember the Clayon 15% of dedicated to at risk?
I do not know the answer. That's still something that I'm not clear about, so I'm trying to figure
Well, he's
it out.
not clear about it either, nor is Dale Dennis.
So if that were to pass, if that gets
Right.
into a bill, that, for example, we now have a budget authority of $52 million.
Right.
15% of that amount, or whatever our budget authority is for 18-19, then would have to be put in at risk is what they were offering as a suggestion. That just, everything we move everywhere else in the general fund and the LOB is 15 million, or 15% of that, which would be what, $7-8 million, would be an at risk. So you get $7 or $8 million that we've got to kind of move around to balance the general fund and the LOB. They all have to be balanced by the end of the day when we submit the budget. We can move the pieces around. We only have so many, we still have the same amount of pieces.
I think we can be fairly confident, if not completely confident, the courts won't go for that because that only impacts the districts that get state aid. So,
Okay? Moving on?
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about, yes?
Yeah, I just got a question. Could you tell me again, I know you said this before, what is the relation, how does the cash balance relate to the LOB?
Can I hold you on that? We'll get to about 2 slides. We're
Yeah.
going to go over that in detail.
Oh, okay.
Is that all right, Mr. Brown?
Right.
That's a critical question,
Right.
frankly, and one I need your direction on
All right.
tonight, I hope. Just very quick, high level, excuse me, I want to talk about Senate Bill 423. And you'll see here, I've got intended, what they intended to pass, and what was actually passed. So first, the first page of intended to pass. What I wanted to point out to you is that if all goes well, as we look at this, and I'm going to start breaking this down for you, because when we put together your budget, we have to do budget estimates. Our audit does not occur. We submit the budget in August. Our audit does not typically occur until close to December. This year it didn't occur until February when they actually started our audit. Our audit creates actual budget figures for us. So keep that in mind. We start school in August. We've submitted our budget to the state and to the county clerk, but we don't know if that's really our budget authority yet. So we're doing the best shaping of the budget that we can. Then we get our audit. So it talks about the importance of the audit. And then that audit numbers we plug in, that becomes our actual budget authority. And I'll show you those numbers specifically. what's important about that is we talk about Senate Bill 423, what they've got here, I highlighted in yellow. I just took a snapshot of, this is like 5 pages when you get every school district, but I took a snapshot with that head on it. When you look at this, they're looking at a $7.2 million increase in our general fund. $1.5 million increase in special education funding for a total of about $8.8 million. That's what they intended to pass. So you're thinking, that's great, $8 million, that's excellent, right? That's more money. Not sure it meets the adequacy test, but it's more money. I will say that. So it breaks down right there in bigger numbers for you there. That's what those highlighted numbers say. What they actually passed was a little bit different. It was about $80-some million less. It actually dropped our school district, based on these numbers, to $4.4 million, but that's spent the same, so a total of $6 million. Still an increase, but these are all based on estimates. This is what becomes important. Those numbers that come out of KSDE on these sheets, it's the only numbers they can use, is what's put in what's called an SO66. That's what we have to budget. The superintendent sends that report up. That's how we develop our budget, the board's budget on those estimates.
So
those are not actuals.
Point of clarification, she's talking about column 1 and column 2 in terms of the estimates on the counts, okay?
Column 1 is your FTE allocation for your students. Column 2 is your full weighted FTEs. So it's number of kids plus all their weights. And that's what drives the budget, is the weighted column. And I'll show you the difference in a minute.
Sorry, so those weights include high risk and things of that nature?
They include at risk, high density at risk, ESL, transportation weighting, CTE weighting.
Bilingual.
Bilingual, thank you. So there's a list of weights. So if student A qualifies as an ELL student, they get the base aid, which this 17-18 is $4,006, plus that weight.
Okay.
And then if they're at risk, they get that weight, and the ELL weight.
So at risk.
So that's why that number looks elevated for the weighted FTEs. All of a sudden it jumps to 34,000, not counting special ed.
So clarify at risk.
At risk is based on free lunch, so it's based on poverty. So that's the qualifier on how they still look at it in the audit. And then they do an actual sampling of our students. They don't look at all, 16,000 or however many at-risk kids that we have. But it's all driven, though, that they have to submit a lunch application or a CEP application, which is a Community Eligibility Program application, because that has their income criteria on those forms. That income criteria, based on their family size and what they earn, determines if they're free lunch, reduced lunch, or paid lunch.
So that's why you were
The free
saying.
lunch kids are the ones that would get at-risk funding for.
So that's why you were saying it's important for them to submit that application, because it matters.
It can drop
on here.
our at-risk funding, which you'll see it did. It impacted our weights because we implemented CEP, which is a good thing. That means we're paying and feeding all of our elementary and middle school students free lunch and breakfast. Without those applications coming in, and actually kudos to the schools, they really worked hard trying to get those applications in for this very reason. But we still saw a drop in our at-risk funds on our weights.
If you ever want recommendations on that, I'll be happy to give you some.
Say that again?
I said, if you want recommendations.
I'm all
on
about
how
recommendations to get those applications. We're knocking on doors.
I
That'd be
didn't get
great.
them all the time. I just have to admit, I did not get my my middle schoolers.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until we had to come up to the school for a reason, but I never got it.
Any input on that? That is so critical in our at-risk weighting. So, again, I say kudos to the staff and the principals. They recognize the importance of that. They really worked hard, but we didn't get them all. And you'll see it. You'll see.
How has it impacted you? I think you said that August 18th is the date that you...
25th.
The 25th. So does the budget take a hit when other students come in after that date?
Yes. So September 20th is the audit date. That's an important day. And we have a little bit of wiggle room in that window. Any student that attends before September 20th or one day up to October 4th. So that's kind of the window, because you might be sick on September 20th on that actual day. But that day, we have to freeze our data system. And that's how they start counting the head count, the actual FTEs. Then the auditor comes in whenever they're scheduled to come in. They review that frozen database, a snapshot at that time, and then they clarify the weights for which students get what. Then that's how the audit sheet comes out.
A simple way to think about that, Mr. Brown, is if they don't come in and get counted on the 20th, we educate them for free.
And since it's not cool to be on free lunch in high school, we have a tendency to really miss out on high school.
Really? Yeah.
It's not cool. And you got
You have actually looked at proposing to the board CEP for high school too. It may be something that we bring forward, but then again, what's the only drawback? CEP being the community eligibility program where we feed everybody for free. So you don't have to worry about that perception of not being cool and having free lunch. Everybody gets their meal, but if we don't get the forms in, it's going to impact the board's budget.
And the same representative that's my favorite, Representative Arn, for my 18 years, he has been insist on attacking at-risk. And Blue Valley was able to cook the books this year and get an extra $2 million with the
At
risk? 10% false number.
10% they got in. The 10%, that's a minimum floor.
But they'll lose that next year.
10% at-risk kids, and they get the money.
Yeah, they got about 7, but they won't get that next year.
When they do the book bag giveaway, do they have them fill them out there?
They do.
They do. Every family advocacy night, I mean, we're sending them home. We actually mail lunch applications to every household. I mean, they try to canvass it. It's just staying on it.
And when we went to the Bridge program or whatever, there wasn't a lunch application in that, it wasn't anything in there, or to explain that you will be getting a lunch application, this is how you fill it out. It wasn't any, that's just an example of, it would have been a great opportunity to have us sit and fill out, because we were all there. You know, although you can't accept it now, but, you know, when I went to fill out for my son or whatever, or I don't know which child, but there was some help in filling it out because the parents couldn't understand it.
The CEP application is much easier in my mind because it's one page. You know, so it's just, you can put all your kids, doesn't matter if they go to 4 different schools, you know, or 2 different schools, you can put them all in one application. The National Food Lunch, the National Food Program application is like 4 pages. It's a lot more involved. But either one works for us, so. Okay? So right now, really what's approved is a potential increase. What was intended was supposed to be more of an increase, but let's take a look to see how that is impacted based on actual versus what's estimated. Because the numbers that we just looked at from KSD are estimated. You need to know closer to actuals because you need to know what you're working on as you think about your budget. So there's our estimated budget on the column to the left. As you look at, we estimated 35,000.
She's going over that now, Dr. Nguyen.
We estimated 35,000 total FTEs, and that's excluding special education. So that typically would jump to about 39,000 with special ed. What came in actually on the audit today is 34,307. That's not number of students, that's all those weights. Number of students plus the weights, right? So first column here is estimate. That was estimated our budget authority. Based on actuals, our budget authority is $137 million, just in the general fund. And there's your $16 million for special education, not changing. A little slight discrepancy or change in virtual education. It's not a loss to your budget. We pad that slightly because we don't know how many adult learners there are going to be. However, we also, every penny that we get charged from Greenbush to run our virtual program, we get paid from the state because we turn in the hours or we turn them in as a full-time or a part-time student. Really shouldn't impact the budget at all. But it does play into what our budget authority is, what we can spend. You cannot spend more than what you publish. So we published the $140 million because that's what we estimated in that. But we can only spend this amount, 137. That's the maximum we can spend because what the state will do, once they finalize the audit, is they'll send out what they call a legal max letter, and that will identify from our audit what our legal authority has become. Interestingly enough about this is we get legal max letters sometime in June. June is the last month of the fiscal year. So we have to keep track of the audit as we go, every step of the way. So we're watching that. So we want to make sure that now, many years, the last 2 years don't really count. They count, but they were block grant years. So none of this made a difference. Everything I just shared with you. Prior to that, oftentimes we would republish the budget. So you republish it with the Code 99, but we would republish it if we got more money, because you can only spend up to what you publish, right? So if you get more money in the audit, which we have to republish it. So you have to constantly be staying on that. Are you with me? So then I got to think, well, Chris and I are sitting there going, well, what do we do for 18-19? The only way we can estimate a budget is to try to look at what we currently have in the current audit. Because we have no idea how many kids are going to get certain rates. We can only kind of look at trend data, right? And that's what you try to do the best you can. So we just plugged in, frankly, the exact same numbers from the current, this year's audit over here. And we ran their formula. The difference for 18-19 under Senate Bill 423, I don't want to complicate this, but it's important, is that you take that $34,000 and you multiply it by $4,900 per student. In the prior year, you were multiplying it by, or this current year, $4,006. Okay, so that sounds good, right? That sounds really good, except this is, I don't know what you want to call it. If I could draw a mirror and smoke, I'd probably draw that for you, but I don't have to do that. So what happens is then you have to multiply that figure by 85%. So they're backing out 15% of that funding automatically. It drops down the budget authority to 142, right there, not the 168. So I'm not sure why we're multiplying it by 4,900, but if you do multiply it by 4,900, you got to back out 15%. So it's really not giving us that much more budget authority, but it does give us some, and therefore your increase. So you see from 137 to 142, and I kind of outlined this is what was intended, the 8.8, based on our actuals, what we're looking at is 5.8 probably.
So, Board, if I'm you, trying to figure out what this means in terms of planning, I would circle that $5,816,000 because that's the amount of new funding estimated by Dr. Mather and Ms. Woodbury.
So that includes the sped money as well.
Yeah, so
Right.
really the general fund money for the board that we're going to talk about is the 4.2 million. The sped is specific to special education,
All right, so
which is 1.5.
nix that and circle the 4.2 because of all the things that you want to do, that's the amount that we have in new money, unless you do something with your mill. So just circle that. She's giving you a lot of numbers. The 4.2 is the one that you want to highlight.
Is this where we will talk about the Greenbush or later? Or
for the virtual or the alternative school?
For the alternative
I'm gonna get to
school?
that. I'm gonna
Okay.
show you that. And I know this is a lot, but I think it's important to understand what's happening in the development of your own budget. So I want to talk about this right here, because I put that in here, I said, after, you back out to 15%, what does the base really look like? And the reason I was curious about that, because if Senate Bill 19, which is how we're currently funded in this year, stayed in effect for next year, we were supposed to get $41.28 per student, right? So we're supposed to get $41.28 per student. So I just did the same calculation on the same spreadsheet, but I put $41.28 here and multiplied it. So now I'm at 141 million versus the current, this 18-19 projection at 142. So you can see we're really getting 1.2 million more than if they would have stayed with the current bill. But since they're saying they're not, they say they're showing that we're going from 4,000 to 4,900. So really, you do the math of that budget authority, it goes down to 41.65 per student. Not really relevant for you all, but important for us to understand probably, but I want you to understand the complexity of this because that drives everything we're going to have to do. So that number becomes our budget authority, potentially. So then I put this in here because this is what I gave you last time. Not going to walk through all this because we got more important things to do. But this is just a picture of one of the pages of the budget on what we have to do to figure a general fund authority. Up here at the top is your current year budget. So you have your virtual funds, you have your total FTEs. That includes special education, you multiply it by your base, and that's how you get your general fund authority. I did the same figure for you down below, except I had to do their kind of quandary of formula where I multiplied it by 4,900, backed out to 15%, added the virtual, and we got your 140. Okay, so that's your actual general fund excluding sped. Budget authority would be 161 million. Because you have to include special education funding, state aid. So I just wanted to show that to you, that's actually in your budget form. Now what we have to also look at is your supplemental general fund, or your LOB. And somebody was asking a question about that. So what's important about that is when you look at your total FTEs, right, they went down around 1,000. What we've done this year and for I don't know how many years, forever, since I've been around, we multiplied that by 4490. I think Dr. Lynn said it was an arbitrary number, which it was at some point in order to calculate your local option budget authority.
Well, just to explain what happened there, when they made cuts, that was where we should have been. And when they made the cuts to the state funding, it would have also forced us to cut our, because we're based on a percentage, we would have also been forced to cut our local funding, so we would have been double hit. So they said, we'll act as though we gave you that higher amount for state funding, so you can keep your local funding, even though we're going to cut your state funding.
2,000.
So, yeah, they created that artificial base, and then they kept it because the state funding has never gotten back to that.
Allows you to tax people more based on that, not the real number.
So then you can increase your budget authority, and that's what gets taxed. Based on actual, so you see it drop, because when your general fund drops, your LOB drops. It just makes sense, it has to, right? So then you have less than this, you will also have less general authority than we thought. We thought we had 52 million, now we have 51.1 million. In the next year, for your planning, what becomes important is they multiply it by 4,900 on the base, and then we add in the state aid, so your taxing budget authority is 186. But what's interesting, because now it's not 30% of your general fund anymore with this new figure. They say, Kelly, we're going to give you $4,900 per student. But rather than 30% of your general fund, you have to drop it to 27.5%. So that backs it back out again. So not only are they backing out the 15%, they're backing out the 2.5%, right? And it puts us, interestingly enough, $43,000 more in our general fund. And that's it. Now, some of that's based on the audit and the actuals, and that makes sense. But there's not a significant, there's really no increase, it's negligible. You look at that figure. So the authority we believe right now is going to be right on the same as the actuals for this year, which is $51 million. Questions about that, Mr. Wren? Did I capture what you're thinking?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Okay. And then this form, same as your other one, but this is your LOB form. Not trying to rush through this, but this is exactly what we figured out. Sorry. See that 173 million for your current year? I just told you it's going to be 186 million. That's the figure we multiply by 30%, but not anymore. We multiply it by 27.5%. And that drops your LOB to 51 million. So that's just the formula for the current year. We'll plug in all the new numbers once the audit's finalized, and my guess is it's going to be around 51 million. I'm going to come back to this because it becomes an important decision for you all on changing your LOB percentage. Because remember, it's always 30%, and you can raise it 31, 32, 33 with the protest petition. But we have to notify the state by April 1, not of the current year, next year if we do it, but I want to show you what impact that would have. Because you may want to do that, you may not want to do that. But first, let's just talk about cash. So, as fancy as I get, I've told you before, I did the same spreadsheet. I like the spreadsheet. This is a direct link to one of my spreadsheets that we work on.
We didn't get that.
Yep, you didn't get it, so I linked it to this one. So,
Oh.
because this is a live spreadsheet, so I'm going to actually
Say,
have
I'm
you see.
looking,
I
I
can't give you a
ain't
live spreadsheet in the hard copy. I can give you a copy of this, but it won't change, and I'm actually going to make it change. So let me explain a couple of things. So right here is our current budget authority, which we now know will be a little bit less. So this is our budget authority. Kristen, can you just scroll that to the left slightly? I want to show that one. Just the whole thing. now, we're estimated in the current fiscal year budget to collect about $9.5 million in taxes. If I'm gonna be a betting person, I think it's probably gonna be a little higher than that, because we've got some trend data here that says we've been collecting about 11 million. Our collections in Wyandotte County, delinquency rates down, collections have been stronger. I'm gonna guess that goes up. I'm gonna guess around 10.5 million. But we don't know, because that's how the forms generate that. We don't just make that up. That's not, it's not something we just make up. We have to go with the form. But the important thing here is that we've had to transfer cash every year. We've had to essentially plan to do a cash transfer into the LOB so that we can keep the mill levy the same. We haven't increased the mill levy in about 5 years. With no cash transfer right now in the LOB, we're going to have $279,000 to start. Let me show you what that does. Scroll back to the right. Take that $6 million and delete it. Just hit enter. So we put no cash in your LOB. What's going to happen is that you're going to, and right here I changed the budget authority to what we anticipate it will be. So I did reduce that for you, 51 million. Our resources then only become our state aid. So we're estimating that. With no cash in there, our only resource is state aid. We need to levy 15 million. That means you got an 8 mills tax increase. If we put no cash in the LOB. Put $1 million in that first slide right there. If we transfer $1 million of cash, it reduces it to 6.95. You can see that. The 2 million. Or 200. That'll work too. Don't have that much. All right, just a little watching.
So, Board, as she's doing that, the point is, if you move cash into your LOB, you don't have to increase your mill levies as much. That's what she's trying to show you. The cash in that is critical, because keep in mind, we don't get state aid until October, and you have to have cash to start the year. So, the more cash in, the less impact on your local mill levy.
So right now, based on these numbers, this is what we have to do on a regular basis to try to figure out where we're at. For years, we had enough cash balance in our LOB that we didn't have to worry so much about it, but by keeping the mill levy flat, we just depleted the cash balance over time. And then we've had to start transferring cash into it so that we could still keep the mill levy flat. If it's the desire of the board to keep the mill levy flat, I need $6 million to transfer into the LOB, and that's going to keep it pretty flat.
Where does that come from, Dr. Mather, the
I'm going to give them
cash?
some options.
Okay, good.
But I just think that
This
that's...
was not play money, it's, you know.
This is not just make up money moving around. You got to come up with $6 million. Then what I will also suggest to the board is that you got to be pre-planning this every year. We have to. So we budgeted some money. You can't budget a transfer to your LOB. It's not in the forms literally, but we planned for a transfer for you. So we planned in the budget already $4 million of that 6. Only because I didn't know what it would be. Last year we transferred about $5.5 million right there. The year before it was about $2.5 million. So we planned a $4 million transfer, but I need 6. So we'll also offer the board to be thinking about a year further out than that. Because if we transfer exactly $6 million in there, guess what happens the year after that? We're right back where we were, right? Which is okay. We just have to be prepared to plan for that as best we can. So I will suggest to the board that you consider thinking in advance about planning a transfer to that budget, another $5 million. Questions about that? Complicated spreadsheet.
You're going to tell
No, I'm
us
supposed to
where
make
you
it
get
simple.
You're going to tell us where you get the cash from.
I'm going to try. You're going to hopefully tell me too, somewhat, but I'm going to give you some suggestions.
Dr. Mather, do we ever have surpluses?
In our budget, we have to expend all of our general fund by the end of the year. Carry a little bit in your LOB, so you can't have some carry over there. But you have to statutorily spend all of your money in the general fund. Yeah.
So
Your savings is your contingency.
Okay.
That's your savings. Which we'll talk about.
That's exactly right.
how much can you have in the LOB?
To carry over in the LOB? I don't think that's capped anymore, the LOB balance. Is there a limit? Well,
The problem is if you carry too high of a cash balance in
That'll
there,
affect your
you're gonna
mill
have a negative mill levy.
No, let's go back to her question.
There's
You're
not a
limited by your LOB by the percentage of your budget.
Yes,
And
budget authority, there is a max, yeah.
Is
So
that
you
what
just
you're
can't-
asking?
You can't get additional dollars if you don't have that tax authority.
Which is the 30%. I need to go back to that. But as far as keeping money in there, you have to plan to transfer that money to the LB lane after the fact. Or else what happens, what Kristen's saying, that you're gonna have, potentially, it's gonna affect your mill levy too. You can't keep a whole bunch of cash that's sitting there. But we have a 30%, we're at 30% of our general fund, depending on the Senate bill. Right now, it's 27.5%. But let's just call it 30% of the conversation. As I said, the board can choose to increase that percentage by 31%, 32%, 33%. And actually, the other figure probably might help if you don't mind. But what that will do is it will generate more money because you're collecting taxes. That's going to raise your mill levy. I'll show you how it's going to raise your mill levy if you make a decision to do that. Scroll down just a little bit. I need to see that blue chart for you, right there. Without getting too much in the weeds, these figures might not be exactly right, because it kind of depends on what they do with the Senate. You know, if they're going to keep changing the percent here, I don't know what they're going to do over here. But hypothetically, if you actually went to a 31%, it's about 1.6 million increase in your LOB budget authority. That's what it would generate for you, but you have to raise your mills 2.2 mils to get that 1.6 million. I can plug all those numbers into that blue chart, and that's what's going to pop up, it's 2.2.
And to the taxpayer, how much does a meal take from their pocket?
Well, I have to go back and figure that. It's a great question, and I can have it, and I should.
Because taxpayers don't think of
Yeah.
meals, they think of
No, they
dollars
don't.
on my
Exactly
tax
right.
bill.
And on a $100,000 house, let me bring it back, because I don't want to misquote. I think I know, but I think it's $11.50 on a $100,000 house, but let me.
So layman's talk is, when Kelly says, you increase the meal, you increase the meal, you increase the meal, translation is you tax people more.
Yep.
So let's use it
That's why
layman's
we've been
language.
trying to keep it flat, because we don't want to increase our taxes and why we can, right? I mean, that's been the direction of the board. That's the direction, is one of your parameters for your budget. You have to tell us what you want. Do you want to keep it flat? Do you want to increase it? I'm just giving you the options. We've kept it flat for about the last 4 or 5 years. If you want to increase it, more money comes out of the pockets of the homeowners, that's right. And more than that, almost double, if you go to 32%, and almost 7 mils, or more money if you go to 33. 33% gives you another $5 million. So you can see the increases of what it gives you. Not huge, but it's there.
So for the past, 3-4 years, we kept it flat?
Yep. We can do it again by putting $6 million in the LLC.
So if you kept it flat, then you had to cut somewhere else. And you're gonna cut back somewhere.
If you want to add things,
Which is
if
what
you
we're
want to
gonna
give
get into.
salary increases, you're exactly right. It's a choice. Choices,
becomes
choices, choices. Right.
And think about it, if we get from the Senate Bill 423, 4.2 million, and there's no other money anywhere, I need 6 to make it flat right now. So they do become choices. You will have to make. Give us direction on what to do.
But at the end of the day, these new bills add new money. So if you spend the same thing you spend, and you have to correct me if I'm wrong. If you got $20 last year and you budgeted your $20, this next year you get an additional $5. That's $25 you had to work with.
If your actuals meet your budget estimate. So
Right.
in our case, we lost the $3 million. We lost, say, of your $5,
After your audit.
After the audit.
Okay.
So now instead of 25, I have 22 to spend for next year. So I still have my 20, but I only
But
have
to
the
go
2.
directly
because
to your question, it's just a thin, I think I'm splitting hairs, but not by definition you have to cut. Not by definition. Realistically, everything goes up. Your light bill's gonna go up. BPU sucks.
So you really will get to a point where you have to make decisions. And make decisions about cutting things or not cutting.
So
but it's
So
not
how
given.
do
I'll show you all
It's
the
not
figures.
given.
How do we make sure that we don't lose that money? Like you mentioned, this year we lost some money after the
And in
budget.
other years, we've gained a lot of money too. So part of it is just, it's an estimation. That's all you can do. There's no way, other than just like I said, looking at trend data, that we will know how many kids are going to be ELL kids or at-risk kids or any of those weights. We can assume that we're going to be pretty close. We were dinged on that at-risk, and I believe it's because of the lunch applications. And that's not blaming anything, it's just we got to continue to push that issue, to see that go up. And also our ELL numbers.
And is the application available to fill out online or no?
Yep.
We can fill?
Yep.
I never knew that, ever.
We mail it, fill it out online, we're sitting with you at different events, maybe not all of them, but a lot of the
didn't know
events
you
we know
could
folks
do
are gonna be, we're there, but, so that's just, one thing that affects it, but I gave you that history of at-risk funds, and prior to the block grant year, we gained 1.8 million, I think, in the at-risk. And I think our poverty in Winnetka County's been pretty stable, I don't think it's going way up, I don't think it's gone way down, so I really think it's the application issue. But it makes a difference on what we have available. Okay, so that just gives you some ideas of options that you can do. So let's talk about what we have to cover. The recommendation. We have to cover our health insurance increase. We just have to do it. Because we pay single plans for all the employees, we're looking at, I have up here $1.7 million. Just happened to meet with our brokers this morning, Kristen and I did. Looks like our estimate tentatively is going to be closer to 1.6, so it's pretty close, right? About $100,000 off. But they're still negotiating on our behalf, so it may change.
So we only pay the employee for all positions?
Individual plan, yeah.
For all
positions.
20?
Eligible employees. All full-time employees, that's a good qualifier. So you have to be.
Well, whomever is
eligible
going to
full-time,
take
yeah.
insurance, okay.
Full-time
So there's no other different, maybe Dr. Lane, but there's no other
Nobody else
family
owns
plans, anything like that?
Right. They can buy family plans.
No, that's not the question.
Okay.
That 1.7 million or 6 million, it's just the single the
Right.
person.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing we have to plan, and I think is a must, is that, and we've got money that we budgeted for this, and I'll get to that, but is enrollment staffing. When we do our enrollment, and we do those projections, that's how we figure out how many teachers do we still need to get to the PTR that you all set, which is the 21 to 1 and 23 to 1. We anticipated there would be a slight change here. Our enrollment head count, that flat. That's good. But we still have increases in head count. I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. I retract that. Head count's stable, but we have increases in staffing. The reason being is that we're staffing for ninth grade academies at a reduced PTR. So we knew that was coming, and we had pre-planned that, but that's in there. So you can see down here that we've got the money covered for that in your budget. We're pretty good. Sub-program, we talked about that, with taking back the sub-program, we're looking at about $725,000 in additional funds, so we need to budget that. The cash for the LOB, we just talked about that. This $5 million, don't need it immediately, but I'm going to strongly recommend you start considering what we want to do for the 2021 year. That becomes critical.
Go back again, what is your enrollment staffing number?
Enrollment staffing is for Diploma Plus. We're looking at, for ninth grade academies. So we've got to make sure that our kids tend to move around. So for example, in the middle schools, which is not the ninth grade academy, but the middle schools, there's an added 3 FTEs because of where kids are at. We will move teachers from one school and put them in another, as long as it's not disruptive, and make too big of a gap. Or sometimes we can't do that, we have to add an FTE. Ninth grade academy, we're trying to staff at 21.5 to 1. Essentially because to do all the academy structure and the scheduling, they're going to need some extra teachers. So that's going to be an add of about 10 teachers, what we're estimating.
Now,
That's on all 5 high schools.
this is, they're going to bring them all in one school, or a school within a school.
For the academy,
Yeah.
it will be within that high school
Okay.
structure, yeah. It's just how they put the schedule together, how they do that. They have more elective tracks, and they have their core classes. So we're estimating about 2 teachers per building on average.
Ms. Page,
Actually,
think
more
about
per
it
line
as small learning communities renamed.
And they
That's
don't
what
do
that staffing
anything? They don't
is.
teach
No,
anything else?
They teach.
No, they're teachers. It's just that we have to add teachers. We don't have enough teachers to get it to that PTR. That's really what that is.
Now, what's a
If we reduce the PTR even more, excuse me, Mr. Brown,
No problem.
then you have to add more teachers. Substitute teachers.
Just, okay, all right.
Okay?
And your sub-program is what?
That would be the sub-program that we come back and actually take. Morgan Hunter's not doing it, so we have money budgeted for that already in the budget. But we're gonna need an additional, estimated $725,000.
So this is
to get that
staff.
operational.
This is staff.
That's part of staff, but that's mostly subs. That money will go into subs and the incentives that I talked to you about as well.
Question, because
But there are 3 staff people, support staff.
how much are they gonna pay them to sub?
We're going to pay them an hourly rate because we have to put it in CIS, which I believe is $20 an hour. So it gets about $140 a day, I believe, so. Fridays, Wednesdays, and Mondays will be problematic for us. So we'll have some incentives built in for folks that choose to sub on those days. And I'll get that whole structure for you. I'm gonna bring it. We're kind of trying to put it together, but we have to track their hours, what's not even really included. I kind of tried to include it in that 725. What I'm a little bit worried about is if we've got folks that sub long-term in a long-term assignment, and they work more than 30 hours a week, I gotta pay them insurance. I gotta pay their insurance for it.
That's what
So that's
someone
another
asked.
liability that I have to, if I have 30 long-term subs because of FMLA, or because we have a vacancy,
Is that number figured in your health insurance increase?
no, that number's not figured in the health insurance increase, and I tried to capture a portion of it in the sub, but, I mean, I'm totally speculating. I have no idea if it'll be 5 people, or, we'll try to manage that number, but
Because Morgan Hunter offered that, but I don't think anybody ever took advantage of it because it was so high.
yeah, they'll offer it under their program, and I don't know what the cost for their insurance programs
It
were.
was expensive.
But they also don't have to use folks in long-term assignments all the time unless the district asks them for that, for continuity. So they can move their subs around, which they will, so the person can still work. But if they work more than 30 hours, then they have to offer them some kind of health insurance. Our district offers a paid single plan. So we're paying a district contribution of $6,200 roughly per person. So if they work more than 30 hours a week, over a period of time, as long as 1 week, there is a formula, you have to look back through 12 weeks, and we pay that $6,200 for them. So we have to track it to see, so there'll be some management in that, and just trying to track all the hours of all the subs.
And capers.
And the capers, yeah.
It's early
Well, that's another thing with the capers too. What was an advantage of Morgan Hunter that I shared with you too is that we don't have to worry about working out of retirement. We have to, they did not. So we know that if a teacher, if I retire tomorrow, I have to wait 180 days before I can even have a conversation with KCK Public Schools to sub. So I've got a waiting period. And then there's potentially that additional fee of 24 to 30%.
It's 12 and then 30.
Okay, 12% and then 30, depending on the.
I might suggest we bring all that detail back because you've got a lot to cover
Right,
tonight.
because 725 is including your 3 staff. I mean,
Right,
we
that's
need
just
to know
added
what
on to
you're
what we've
doing.
already budgeted, right.
We need to know what
In
you're doing.
I
addition-
think I've already got that scheduled for you, Board of Report
Okay, it
on
needs to be
subs.
soon.
So then the middle there is your increase that we're anticipating, really 4.2 million is general fund that we're anticipating, and 1.5 for sped. And these are some funds that I'm going to probably recommend to the board to be looking at. It doesn't cover all of this because it doesn't even talk about compensation yet. That's something we can talk about in a little bit. The plan enrollment, I'm sorry, the plan expenses for LOB, I told you we had planned on that, so $4 million, got you covered. Planned enrollment, but I need 6. Got that covered. Then these things I would start having you consider. One is this 1.75, which I'm sure you'll do, because that's going to offset our insurance increase, is that we have to pay for all employees, even when they waive their insurance plan. We still have to pay that premium. But if we have a decent and favorable claims year, meaning we have a lot of claims, we get that money back. I'm anticipating that we'll get enough back to offset that increase. That's our hope. Might be a slight discrepancy based on the conversation this morning. I might need about $500,000.
Is that because the way you set the contract up to get, Because that doesn't make sense. If they
Have to
don't
do it.
accept it, why would you pay?
And that's how we have to fund all of the liability in the district. So when you set up your health insurance, it's not just for KCK, that's how it is. We have to fund all of the potential liability. Because frankly, we may not get anything back in a given year, depending on if we have a really bad claims year, a lot of sick folks, people making lots of claims, they use that money to play that overage for us. So right now, it looks like we're gonna get money back. Like I said, I think we were thinking maybe $500,000 that we're gonna be shy, but hopefully it won't be 1.7 million, so it could be pretty good there. Also had you recommend contingency transfer at whatever amount we need to get to. I put 2 million up there. Again, remember, this doesn't include compensation. So 2 million, 3 million, 4, you have 17 million in your contingency. I don't like making the recommendation, but I will make the recommendation to consider that, because when you look at it, once you take it out, it's gone. So the board had worked hard to get to 17 million, because why? It's 1 month of payroll. It's just a savings. Hope we don't have to ever use it for that, but you never know. And then we have our special reserve transfer, which is a recommendation. We are self-funded in our work comp program. We carry around $6 million in there. We're supposed to carry at least $6 million in. We've been told that for years and years. Our liabilities per year have been less than that. I think we'd be okay to take transfer out of there of about 1.5 and still feel pretty stable in that self-funded work comp. So again, it's one of those things that you can only look at trend data. You might have a really bad year, who knows? So that's just recommendations for that. Then on the next page, just very quickly, I tried to go back and look at all the things you guys talked about. I may have missed some things, so we'll get to other considerations in a minute. And start putting some dollar figures to them so you can look at it. Very quickly, under high expectations for kids, we talked about, on this page, I think early childhood you mentioned earlier. I just put 5 teachers, I don't know, because no discussion's been made about that. That's 275,000. The enrollment, those are the numbers we just talked about for the high school and the middle school enrollment. And then there was conversation, if you recall, about reducing the kindergarten, first grade pupil-teacher ratio down to any other number besides table A1 to 19 to 1. So I gave you figures about $947,000 if we go 19 to 1 on kindergarten PTR. Questions about any of those? Okay, on safe and respectful learning, social workers, counselors, child psychologists, those 3 categories I heard folks talk about. I went and I looked at how many social workers we have, how many counselors we currently have, and how many school psychologists we have, which is different than a child psychologist, but school psychologists, they work with special ed kids and do IEPs. And then I got those figures 3.8 to 6.3, so depending on the request. One of the requests was 2 per building, middle, elementary, high, and one was 3. The higher number is 3. And I took out all the ones we already had. So for example, we have 20 social workers in the district currently. I took out the 20 from the number we would need to get to those figures.
Okay, with the new grant that they talked about over this weekend on the news, I know you don't know it. I mean, you know, they haven't told you when you get the money, but the money that they allotted for mental health and how it's supposed to go to foster kids, how does that play into that?
I will let David, if he wants to address the legislative issues. My understanding and everything I've looked at in the current Senate bill, the money will not come to the school district for that directly. Now, if they fund mental health organizations, that would look different, but David, I'll defer that to you. Yeah.
So we don't have enough details yet, Ms. Page, to know what we'll get from that. Hopefully we will soon.
So it probably doesn't impact it a whole lot if it's not our money and it's somebody else's, unless they're going to put those folks in our buildings and provide services.
Yeah, if you
that would be something we're
refer
certainly
them
trying
or
to do.
move them, or
might be helpful.
They come in, however they do it.
Well, what numbers did you submit and how?
Well, when in the conversation, again, we never got the actual language, but what we told them was, you can't do this work in our schools without support for schools to be able to coordinate. We made that very clear, but there was an active lobbying presence from Kessler in order to get directed money to the CMAC. And I think that's where...
Which stands for Community Health Centers.
Mental health centers, right? I think that's where Representative Landwehr intended the money to go. That was what she wanted.
It would only be 25 students at 10 schools?
It would be,
75 supposedly for, divided by 3.
yeah, those would be the students that were getting support, yeah.
And they would be foster kids only.
Which we have 213 in the district, so a small number.
So my question to you, with these numbers, this is the lower number 2, the higher number 3. What did you say about your 20 current social workers?
I've taken the number, so, see if I have it here, hold on.
This is just the increase.
Okay, that's what I wanted
When we get to this, we have to make decisions here. So you've got social workers here. That's the 2 per school, the 3 per school. And I have to look at one of my other spreadsheets, Dr. Wynn. But say, for example, we have 80, we need 80 social workers to get to that ratio for every building, 30 elementaries, 8 middle schools, and 5 high schools. I took the 20 and subtracted it out, so I'm not double counting them. So that means I only need 60.
The only challenge with that is our current social workers can only work with special ed
That's
kids,
right.
so you really can't count them.
But I did the same thing with counselors, and I did the same thing with school psychs, but school psychs are not child psychologists. That's what I'm kind of saying, so it's a range. It could be anywhere from 2 million.
So the social work number will actually probably be higher because we can't count those 22. They can't serve anybody else except the population they currently serve.
Same with school psychs.
Right, but you didn't count school psychs in this
Yeah,
number.
school psychs is child psychologists, so that number will go up as well.
So have you added up all the numbers on this page, Dr. Mather, in terms of the dollar amount of things that we've generated that we'd like to have total?
Yes. Minus some of the cash for the LOB, it's about $25 million.
Okay.
And I think that shows on another page as we go through.
Thank you.
So we talked about the alternative schools came up, so I wanted to point that out, just how I came to that figure. I looked at Parker Elementary School, which is the smallest school we have, with 109 kids. And we just looked at staff, how many teachers, I gave teachers, principal, custodian, all that. Just on staffing that size of the school for 100 kids was 1.1 million. So that's how I came up with that. Yeah, it wasn't a random number, I just had to have something to anchor this into, so I anchored it into a small elementary school cost. I didn't know for the middle school, so I just used that number. Because I don't know if we're talking 100 kids, you know, that structure would look different, all that drives those figures, so these are estimates. Talking about OB, high-performing workforce, special education, staffing needs, and some increased teacher needs, there is an increase in sped funding. Their needs are about 1.4 million right now. I think the funding that's coming in is almost 1.6, 1.5 something. Compensation we'll talk about later. Paid holidays for non-exempt staff. Now that came up with somebody, can't remember who. That's 1.3 million. Sub-program we talked about, health insurance we talked about, recruiting retention incentives is an additional funding to keep going on what we're doing with paying for masters for SPED teachers and for incentives to recruit hard-to-fill positions. And then the community gardens is the program Ms. Brownlee Page had asked about. I put that up here because it's continued to come up. I did have a lengthy conversation with Ms. Pomeroy about that. So I can inform the board, we legally cannot provide a community agency public levied tax dollars. We can't do that. The only way to support their program is what we've done historically, and that's providing transportation to them because they're supporting our kids or our students. Statutorily, it says I can do that, but I cannot just hand over money to a community agency or else everybody would be lining up and people would want the school district money. But there is a way of doing it, potentially, and that would be maybe you hire the community gardens person as an employee, and that supports that program, but they would have to work for you. Or maybe under a contractual agreement, perhaps. It has to be something like that where they become your employee.
Well, how did they pay them before?
We haven't paid a community program money. The only thing we provided for them in the past are things like transportation. We pay for all their buses.
But I thought they also paid for the garden person.
They pay for them. Ms. Pomeroy's program pays for them. We do.
We covered this past year $7,000, I think, Kristen, in gap funding for her, so we paid for the partial of that salary this year because she just couldn't, she would have had to shut the gardens down. But I think what Dr. Mather's saying is that we have the option of hiring that person or contracting with that person, and here's what it will cost,
That would
$40,000
be my
for
recommendation.
moving forward.
If that's what you're wanting to support, to do that.
Because I asked Del Dennis, and of course he was busy, so Brian, his deputy, said it would have to have a contract with that organization. But that it was possible via contract. Of course, Greg, you could further inquire.
Either way, it's $40,000 to take that.
Contracted employee, like an independent contractor.
So there's always a way.
High
It's just how you do it.
performing workforce, the special ed staffing and teachers, 1,480,000. Is that based on the need, a projected need?
Based on student needs and getting resources to buildings, majority teachers, and also a coordinator that's needs to be refilled and assistant director.
Okay, so I'm going to assume that we are looking to fill that need.
That will be a decision, you tell me.
Okay.
Yeah, that's up to you all, because you
Yeah.
could say, well, the thing is, you got 1.5 million that you have to use for special education, so I would recommend that, yes, you take care of getting the teacher needs met, so our kids that are special kids with the services they need. But that's, again, your decision, you gotta tell us on the budget. That's why I put it up there.
Gotcha.
Okay? So, what have we missed? What have I missed? That's other considerations or things that you're interested in talking about. I'm sure I didn't capture everything. I tried to every time we were all having conversations.
So
Right now,
meaning,
that's at 25.
what other things would the board like to consider funding? That's the question. In
So-
addition to what's on this sheet.
There was comments relating to how we can possibly fund a program that would remove students who have discipline issues to a different cohort or a different setting. That's not currently included, is that correct?
Well, I put for elementary school, because I heard you all say elementary, middle, and potentially high school. So elementary, middle, I put the 1.1 estimate in there, $1.1 million estimate. But there's no place, we have to figure out where we would put them. There's not a facility for alternative school. For the high school, Greenbush had provided a proposal to expand their high school alternative program. Currently, they serve 75 kids. The proposal was an expansion for 25 more kids for $275,000.
So we should add that to the list.
Yeah, I think it's on there. I think I might have skipped it. It's on there somewhere.
Is that comparable to what we currently contract with them, so it's a fair amount? Okay.
Because when you look at the alternative settings, your
You see it.
PTR has to be much smaller, like a 1:8, 1:9 kind of ratio, depending on which kids you're serving. That's all driven by the type of student. If it's a behavior issue, you're gonna have your lower PTR, you're gonna have to.
But we would just be outsourcing to them and let them.
Well, right now, we outsource to them for the high school, right?
Right.
We could, that's an option, is to expand that for high school kids. Now, it doesn't include the middle school kids and the elementary, which is why I wanted to give you at least some figure that tried to anchor in something.
I don't see that on here, Dr. Mather. Maybe I'm just looking
Maybe
and missing.
in another-
275,000, is that what you said for 20?
275,000 for an additional 25 kids.
Thank you. Maybe others found it, but I didn't see it.
It may not be on that chart.
I've had some discussions or received some communication concerning security guards as compared to our law enforcement people. That unless a student violates code class XYZ, the current law enforcement cannot intervene, number one. Number two, I've gotten communication that a lot of the law enforcement have been asked to intervene in discipline issues, which again is outside of their realm. So I'd like to have a discussion about hiring some security guards, in addition to law enforcement, for the purposes of aiding in the discipline issue. And I guess it goes back to Dr. Strickland and Dr. Lane. I'm not comfortable satisfied, all those other verbs, with what is being done to address discipline. And when you said, oh, it's taken care of, obviously it wasn't. So I'd like to have a discussion, is there another role for security guards? Because a law enforcement can't do a locker sweep, can they?
Unless they have probable, is it probable cause? I get the legal terms mixed up. I think you have to have probable. They can stand by though, always, with an administrator doing.
Well, we're getting the report, they're standing all
They
right.
used to, but they used to actually, as a security guard, is probably what they're saying, you used to be able to do that.
Right.
It's a security guard.
As a LEO,
They-
I think
They
have to have
cannot.
probable cause or
Well,
something.
that's,
Whatever the legal
it's a little bit mixed. So on their own initiative, as a sworn law enforcement officer, they have to have probable cause to do searches, but not for locker rooms, I don't, well, not for lockers, I don't think, because those are owned by the school
I
itself.
think that's how they're being directed, that's my understanding.
We can bring that back.
Or they
Dr.
support
Wayne,
the
how many are you
administration.
thinking? Are you thinking of
I don't
one or
know.
two to every building? You want us to bring back some thinking?
I need a discussion because the incident that was told to me, the elementary schools do not have law enforcement, correct?
That's, they have a middle school officer who's assigned, who's supposed to visit daily, but they're not on
Yeah,
site.
so when the fight breaks out and the 911 of the local police are called, they come. And so I think it gets a little messy.
So we have, what's the budget for the police officers now? Total budget? Do you know that off the top of your head?
Oh, yeah, I
Kristen?
don't know.
Okay, I was just going to try to give us an estimate of 30 officers would cost what? 30 security officers.
And also, right now, there's some vacancies.
That's just, there's some
But,
library.
Right, we'll bring it back.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll bring it back. So you're thinking
So one per
camp,
building?
security guard
Or
per
two?
building,
Or
including elementary?
we'll determine that with our discussion. I don't have any basis right now, period. So I'm not gonna.
So you want me to bring options? I just want to know how to calculate.
I
So
would
maybe
think it-
one per building and then two per building, that kind of option.
I would recommend, based upon school sizing,
Okay?
that we would determine how many would be needed, not necessarily saying 2 in each building, but what's the school size?
So Wyandotte having 1,500 kids versus Schlegel with 1,000 kids.
Right.
Have a different number.
Right,
Okay?
right.
So can you do like per pupil, so I can remember that?
Also, I had asked Dr. Lane for an audit of salaries. I don't know if would this come in the budget, where we would look at salary across board to see how?
Well, every year, the board will approve new salary schedules for employees, and the staff do a market analysis to bring you any adjustments. But part of that conversation is also what you need to talk about tonight in terms of what kind of increases do you want to give. So that process is built in.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Other considerations, things that I haven't captured in the items that we talked about.
You've not yet met with budget managers to know what additional things they're asking for,
We
right?
sent out forms, the budget forms, and they got out there.
They're due at the end of the month.
So there may be some things that surface from your principals, from your budget managers, needs that they have that we don't have captured here.
As I shared before, the board, we decided not to meet with them yet because I didn't know what the school finance formula was going to be. Don't want to just run them through an exercise to be running them through an exercise. So they're working on some ideas there.
Do we have any committees who actively reach out to the community, to the community business partners? I know we're part of the chamber, but how active are we with asking for funding or money for Diploma Plus? Because I believe, Dr. Lane, you said there was a cost for sending our students to take college courses?
Right. That's
And
currently
so-
in your budget.
And so are we soliciting monies from business partners?
We have a full-time grant writer and fundraiser that helps us with that, specifically as a result of not only Diploma Plus, but all departments to help write different grants if they're available as well. Also support through the Foundation for Excellence. So she helps with that, helps bid to get to organization. It's our foundation school. They get some funding in that actually helps with funding some of the scholarships. for kids.
Okay.
They give out at the end of the year. So, to answer your question, yes, as much as we can with one person. You know,
Okay.
One person, but the administration obviously works with businesses and talks to folks on a regular basis, and Diploma Plus, and receiving as much support as we can. We're outside.
I was gonna say, because Argentine has a very good base for pulling some of those resources, but I'm not quite sure how we could get it to all the schools. I'm still trying to understand a little more about how we can have that equal type of resource availability to all schools rather than just certain ones.
How do we get money into the gifts and grant category fund?
Well, that's what Dr. Yeager's talking about. So anytime we get a donation, we can go in there. Anytime we get any rebates from our purchasing clerks or any rebates from any vendors, goes in there. Casino distribution goes in there.
And what governs you spending of it?
Like we do. And that pretty much will sit there on a regular basis, mostly used for Diploma Plus classes. That's really the intention behind that. With the exception of specific grants that are written and put in there, because those are directed by whatever the requirements of that application are. So like we had SIG grants in there, school improvement grants, or preschool grants, ARC in there. That has to be used for those purposes. That drives that expenditure. Any other expenditure is driven by the board or the Diploma Plus.
I'd like to see more information on that, because that's kind of a category we never talk about.
I thought I showed that to you. I'll get that back in the last
We see it every
presentation.
month, but we never know what
I thought I broke it out for you, what was in there exactly. But
We need it brought back.
So the KU funding of the medical center at Wyandotte, it's just a flow through, or it's just they handle their own money?
We don't, the Bulldogs
Yeah.
program at Wyandotte, we don't fund that program.
So they
That's a
totally-
partnership.
Okay.
Dr. Lane, is there anything else? Because we'll need to get to executive session.
We'd like to have time in executive session to talk about compensation.
That's what she just
That's
said. She's ready to go.
I'm ready to go there.
Well, I have one more concern, because we had a parent whose child was dyslexic. And where does that fall under? And that's at-risk student. Do we really have a good enough program for kids who fall between the cracks? And how, do we have something for them? Now, I was told we pay someone, we split the cost with someone in Piper. And our kids, are we meeting their needs? Because she's concerned. She brought that up, and I was told it was in negotiations, but that is a problem for some of our students. And are we really meeting their needs?
That 1.4 million here, Ms. Page, under priority 5 is what the special ed folks have said they need an additional staff to support needs such as that.
Because I didn't know it did. I know that's just throwing it all under one umbrella, but just want to make sure we meet. I just felt bad that she mentioned it. It didn't seem like much was coming about. And I know we don't have all the information, but we just want to make sure we're meeting that need.
I think they're working through that particular child's needs through the IEP process, and Greg's been involved in that to try to help move it forward.
Yeah, because that lady told me that there was a dyslexia teach specialist at Piper. And since we're in a co-op, the question was why that Piper teacher wasn't utilized. And Parent Leslie was told that they were just, it wasn't there. So there's some clarity need to happen.
I think there's some disconnects.
Must be a lot of disconnects.
Move into executive.
We're ready to move into executive session. Thank you, Dr. Mather.
We can't hear you, Ms. Jones.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Dr. Mather. We're ready to move into executive session.
The exception is on here. Oh, you got it. Go ahead.
I need a motion for the board to recess into executive session at 8:30 and to establish budget parameters pursuant to the exception for employee negotiation under the Kansas Open Meeting Act. The board will return at how much time do you need?
Dr. Mather.
Dr. Mather.
How much time do you need?
Dr. Mather?
I can only do one thing at a time these days. Everybody says unplug, yeah, I unplug. In exactly maybe 15 minutes.
Return at 8:30. 45?
That's 15 minutes, Madam President.
I said, I'm waiting on a motion.
Oh, so moved.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor? Those opposing? Hearing none, so ordered. Thank you.